All right, and we are live. Welcome everybody to Total Tabletop. This is episode 1 of World Building. Thanks everyone for being so patient. This did take a little bit longer than we were anticipating, but we are finally here. Got lots of stuff to go over, but thanks everybody for being here. We'll go through some introductions first, and then we'll just dive straight into it. If you are a dev applicant, if you are wanting to look into joining us, you'll be watching this to kind of get caught up on everything. We want to thank you for your interest and hope everything looks cool. Our Discord is down below if you guys want to ask us any questions. You can get in there and inquire there. We'd love to hear any feedback you guys have. It's going to be a collaborative process, but I am DM Steelax for the channel. I run some of the other stuff also on the channel. We have lots of cool stuff which I'll get to in a minute, but I don't know, what should we go over? Let's see, I guess we can do who you are, maybe your experience for tabletop stuff, all the things that you're involved in on the channel maybe, and then anything else you want to say. See, started playing tabletop in high school. My English teacher was a nerd, and he kind of did his own homebrewy kind of stuff for people during lunchtime, and that's where I first got exposed to it. But there was a huge stigma to nerd stuff, like you get beat up if you got caught, so I was a closet nerd, I guess. It wasn't until I was older and got out of high school that I actually started really looking into this stuff and decided I wanted to stream it. So we started the channel, I think like 2 years ago. Reached out to online community, got a bunch of devs, and started building Horseman Apocalypse. And the channel evolved and grew from there, and we brought in other shows and other people on the staff, and here we are. And we're getting ready to try to transition to a new chapter, a new phase for the channel. And we decided that we're going to build a whole new game from scratch, but not just a world. We're going to build a whole system, and with that we want to publish some books, and it's going to be a big endeavor, and we're going to be relying on the community, you guys, to help us out. We really are going to be looking for feedback, critiques, ideas, and the stuff you guys come up with. If we like it, if it fits, it may come into there, and we can give you guys accreditation and stuff like that in the content. So while we're going through, we're going to be showing the rough outline of the books and everything, and we're going to first be getting you guys caught up on everything we've done thus far. We got a pretty good concrete foundation. Our plan is to eventually get more devs, more people in on the team with us every week, so that the overlay, the outline of what you guys see on screen will change as we're getting more people. So if this sounds like something you want to be a part of, we are taking applications, so more details will come for that. But yeah, that's pretty much the gist of my story. But we got two other people, so we'll go Joe, then Ben. Go ahead, and who are you? What you do on the channel? Your tabletop experience, stuff like that.
Sure. Hello, everyone. Uh, Joe, if you're in our Discord, Microcosmic God, though I just got excited about this show, so now my parentheses is creator of worlds. I'm stoked to be here. I've been tabletop gaming for about 15 years and steadily increased the frequency of that as I got older. I didn't have the nerd stigma. I went to a high school that was pretty cool. Most of the jocks were also musicians, so all of them were music nerds with me, so it wasn't too hard a life to just live my nerd self. On the channel, obviously here, I'm a developer for the world building stream. We're going to get this system built, made, and incredible with hopefully some help from some of you guys who kind of get what we're doing, want to join in, be part of it. We want input and new people, so we're all very excited to meet some of you. I kind of joined in looking to be a player and found a great community instead. I may or may not be involved in some other things going forward, so we'll
Fingers
see.
crossed. Hopefully, we get you. Yeah, fingers
we'll,
crossed.
We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
But for now, I'm a developer and just gonna be hanging around the community until they force me to leave. So
that won't be happening, I promise. Well, welcome and thanks for joining the team. It's good to have you.
Ben, I go by Flower Crown Gaming on the Discord server or Ugly Goblin Fleet on Twitter. I've been playing tabletop RPGs in both the fantasy and sci-fi settings for about 17 years now. Got started at a young age. But yeah, I'm part of the dev team. It's currently the only project I have going.
That means we can delegate lots of work to you.
I mean, I have a day job.
Yeah, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you. So the three of us have been working together for a couple months now, maybe a few months, kicking around ideas, and we got a pretty good foundation. Just so everyone is aware, everything is tentative to change. Nothing is 100% locked in, so if you're watching this and we're 30 episodes in, or I don't even know, but like if we're super far, a lot of things you might see here are tentative to change, so just be aware of that. It is a constant evolving thing, which is good. When we get to the point where most of the stuff is locked in, we're going to be looking for playtesting. Lots and lots of playtesting. So anybody who's wanting to run games, be player for games, when we get to that point way down the road, you guys will all be able to get this all the digital books to be able to do that. So if you guys stay involved and are watching week to week, we'll be able to get you guys' feedback and you guys can play essentially for free. So it's just a way to thank everybody for going along this journey with us. It should be a lot of fun. All right, so we can just jump into it. Let's see. First, is there any announcements for the channel? On Sundays, we got Ages Past, which is run by AJ. They got some players that are going through a campaign. They're getting really far into their game, so that's on Sundays at 6:30 p.m. Pacific time. On Tuesdays, we have Horsemen of the Apocalypse, which is a game that I run. I got 4 players who are doing that. It's a time travel game. It's a 5th edition homebrew. On Wednesdays, really soon, we're going to be kicking off Rise of Unity, which is going to be run by DM Spaz. I almost said Steelax. That's me. It's going to be run by Spaz. I'm going to be a player. We got a couple other players. Right now, we're in the character creation concept, and we have an artist who's drawing up everything. So all that details will be released on our Discord. Then we got this show, which is going to be on Saturday mornings at 10 a.m. So forget your Saturday morning cartoons. this is your new Saturday mornings. We're glad you guys are here. And then we have some other shows that we are trying to kick off on the channel as well. And also I'm looking at trying to do some collabs with some other channels. So more details will be coming for that. And you guys can check out the YouTube. And I say we got Ventus with us. Morning. Thanks for showing up, man. Feel free to throw any feedback you got in the chat as we get going. Do you guys have any plugs you want to do for any of your other endeavors, social medias, anything like that? If you don't, it's okay, but go ahead.
I know that there is a D&D block party going on all weekend over on the Venture Maidens channel, and I will be modding one of their games tomorrow from 5 to 7 Central Time.
Okay. Is there a link for that, or?
Yes, I'll have to grab it for you.
Sure. Go ahead and drop it in the chat. Every week when we do this, if you guys have anything that you want to plug or whatever, feel free. All right. So this is going to be a lot bit of lore dump just to get everybody caught up. So you two feel free to jump in and expand. It doesn't just have to be me going on a massive monologue. It's going to kill my throat if I'm just talking and talking. I should have put some music on this. Oh, well, that is something that will have to come. So we'll just start going through it. Before we do that, I think context of original thoughts and concepts for what we were thinking when we first got into this, and then we'll kind of go over how it evolved and changed. So if you guys want to jump in on that, where original ideas came from and how it morphed to what it is going to be now.
I think it's a good starting point as any. I guess that's before our time. If you want to go way back.
Okay. See, originally, we were looking at... So the channel originally started off as being called Horseman of the Apocalypse because I just had the one game. And when we were first starting that one, we started a second game at the same time. It was called Hoda 2. With the plans on keeping that Horseman theme for it. But then the channel evolved. We brought in Ages Past, and Chubby came on and did some show. So we started branching out to more than just Horseman of the Apocalypse, and we rebranded the channel to Total Tabletop. And now we're trying to gear the channel towards spreading out to more tabletop things, more games, more systems, not just D&D, not just my one game. But originally, that game started off with wanting to use the Horseman theme for this game as well. But that has long changed. But something that we did like was kind of an elemental magic theme, a web being the core. It'll all be kind of based off there. That's a really cool concept that's been used before, like an Avatar and some other systems. Pokemon uses a elemental kind of thing. But originally started with 4. We ended up changing to 5. So that's something that we really, really liked. Liked the idea of like Starfinder and some steampunky games where they combine sci-fi aspects with the fantasy side. So that's kind of something that has kind of stuck through, is wanting to bring in our own version of what we think would be a really good blend of the two, of future tech, space travel, stuff like that. That the space wasn't the original idea, but we ended up bringing that in, and it stuck, and we really, really like it. So that's for there. We're going to be making our own system. So that's still something that's very tentative. We don't know if it's going to be D20 based, if it's going to be D6. Lots of different ways to mechanically play the game. So we'll be definitely looking for your guys' feedback as we go through all that. We're going to be making our own classes, our own races. Still not sure exactly how we're going to do it because of permissions. You're allowed to use stuff from other books for your own games, but if you actually publish your own, there's that fine line of what you can actually regurgitate and what you have to make your own. So races is really going to fall into that. So a lot of that stuff's going to change. We might have to rename everything and actually change how they are. Not exactly sure. Let's see. We have decided to go to a multi-planet system. So this is obviously going to be in the space theme, but we really want to keep that aspect of the fantasy side of it as well and blend it in together. So that has been one of the big hurdles that we are facing, is how much is sci-fi, how much is fantasy, how big of a role is magic going to play, because we also have feature technology, but we will get further into that. So we got a bunch of planets that we're going to go over. We'll kind of touch base on what we have for character creation. The original concept was to have a combat character sheet and a social character sheet. That's proving to have some challenges as well, so that's something we will go over. Any other base concept stuff that's brought us to where we are today?
No, you've hit the big picture. It's grown a lot. It's when I very first got involved, it was a 6-hour conversation in the middle of the night because we couldn't stop coming up with cool ideas. And back then it was just a continent, maybe two, with overlapping elemental influence. We've grown to an entire system, whether it's going to be a galaxy, I don't know, we haven't nailed all the points down, but it's a much bigger scope with a lot more room to play in. So it's come a long way, and it's got a lot more to go. It's very exciting.
Yep. Let's see. Structure for how the books are going to be. We're looking at doing a game master's book, a player handbook, and the plan is to do 5 modules. And this is going to be set up to where the modules will be based on the 5 inner circles you guys can see there: the fire, the air, the earth, the lightning, and the water. And all of these modules will take place in the same system, the same world. It's going to involve the planets, but they're going to have their own perspective for their story. So like the fire book will focus on things that are going on with that guild. So the structure of what actually is going to be in the books, we still got to figure out. But we do like the idea of having 5 books having their own storyline in the big thing. But then what we're going to do when we finally bring this game to our channel, we're going to run all 5 at the same time. So all that will be explained in the Game Master's Guide, letting people know who are running games how you would run them independently, all together, or concurrently. So say you are a GM and you're going to be running this, and you pick the air book, for instance. You could just have your players create characters, and you could run through all of that content. And of course, just like one of the best things about TTRPGs is DMs can make any changes they want. We want to keep that main theme. You guys can customize it however you want. We're just giving you things to use if you want to use it. But say you ran your players through, they leveled up, they finished the content for air. You could then, if you wanted, continue the story into another module and explore more of the thing. And it could be 1, it could be 2, it could be all 5, or you could run all of them at the same time, or you could just take references and make your own game. So we want it to be very flexible and fluid in that, and that's just going to add to the complexity putting this all together, but it should come out to be very cool. So we're excited about that as well. All right, so where do you guys think we should start? What's the first thing we should dive into for getting everybody caught up on everything?
I guess broad concepts first. We want to talk about what we've got on the guild concept.
Okay.
Then we can dive down into each guilds to hit those planets and run the races.
All right. So on screen, you guys can see the books as we're working. A lot of it says filler, because we got to flush a lot of things out, but that way you guys have at least things to look at. So if you want to start with the guild side, that sounds like a good place to start. All right, so we have our Fire Guild, which everything's tentative to change, of course, but we're calling the Ignis Guild, which is also the Artisan Guild. Then we have the Ventus is gonna like this. The Ventus Guild, Ventis. It's for the air elemental side. That's gonna be the Transit Guild. Then we have the Terrace, which is gonna be the Legislative Guild, which is the Earth one. And then we have the Fulgus, which is Lightning, and they're gonna be the Militant Guild. And then Aquis, which is the Commerce Guild. And so these guilds are going to each be based on different planets scattered throughout the system, and they're going to be having a theme that goes with it. So let me find the guild side. Okay. Which one do you guys want to start with?
Well, you're already on it. Aquis is as good as any.
All right. So the Aquis. Okay, so it is based on Truinus, which is one of the planets. Commerce side. Okay, so go ahead and jump in here, guys, whatever you guys want to start going over with.
Just pulling up the Aquis Guild in our notes here. They're the Commerce Guild, so they've kind of managing all the interplanetary intersystem, if we're going to call them systems, trade. You're going to feel presence of guilds in all the books. They encompass the whole place. They touch every kind of planet, government, but the Aquis book is always going to focus on some of their goals and their main storyline. Truinus is a monocrop planet, so their home world is based on Truinus, where they kind of have, over time, turned their whole planet into a giant farm, factoring just one specific plant. They're going to be heavily tied to another planet that we will get to in time, Albalon, which is where they export it all. But their origins of this, at the moment, 200 years ago, we haven't nailed down a timeline, but they're fun to develop. There's a lot of question marks. So they cured with this plant a disease that was starting to kind of run rampant on their planet. And when they found out it was somewhere else, they of course stepped in to help. But some enterprising someone high enough up kind of saw an opportunity to secure a future planet-wide. And after curing their own peoples, they genetically modified the plants to have highly addictive properties. So they've created a medicine that is also a drug, creating two planets that are basically entirely dependent on one another. The entire economy of this one world is based on exporting this one product, and the livelihood of all those people is dependent on cure that is killing them. So it's right off the bat two very connected peoples that will be talked about technically in Terra's book. We will explore that side of things, whereas in the Aquis book we are going to be getting more into the actual Commerce Guild and how it impacts the world around it.
Awesome. And each of we kind of spread it as a web, so we circled around the planets. Some won't be technically a planet, but areas of interest that the campaign will focus on as a whole. And each book, or each element, branches out to some of these connecting planets, and we've kind of given those planets an elemental theme. So all of the planets that the Aquas book touches, each of those planets are going to have another elemental theme tied into them. So with the water, fire, air, earth, and lightning as the center hub, they all are going to branch out and touch other ones. So the Aquas book guild will have presence on Shiva, which is the ice planet, and that one has air. So air, water make ice. Then we have Sakar, which is the steam planet, so that will have water but also fire. And then we have Athea, which is water and lightning, and then Truinus, which is water and earth for wood. Okay. So, and then we also have put some commonalities of those as well. So there's going to be a tribalism kind of feel for this book, for this guild's influence and the things that it's touching on all of them. So they're all going to have their own aspects of how tribalism works, but they'll all have that kind of common theme within all of them. Okay. It's going to be hard to go into these without getting into the planets, so maybe we'll just keep it pretty basic for each of the guilds, because honestly those are going to need the most development, and then we can branch maybe over into the planets. Fulgus Guild will be next on the line. Is there anything, Ben, that you wanted to add about the Aqua Guild?
Nope, y'all pretty much covered that.
Okay. Alright, Fulgus is the lightning, and that is going to be touching the plasma area, which we have decided to have this one not be a planet. It's going to be more of a nebula kind of area and an asteroid type belt, which we'll get into more when we get to the actual area. But that's where the guild is going to be based in, is that plasma section. So that will have influences of lightning and the fire. And then we have Othea, which we already talked about. So lightning will be in there. It'll touch Zed, which is the crystal planet. And then we have Solaris 8, which is going to be a space station, and that's going to be magnet focused with lightning and the air. Militant Guild, so that is where, let's see here. What were we deciding with the military side of it?
Well, in general, the kind of intercooperation of those guilds, the various police forces, militaries will all be somehow tied to the militant guild. So interplanetary conflict is all going to be handled by them. Some of the smaller stuff will be, and they had a trickle up, but the idea that power is held by a handful of people at most. So in some cases it was corporate ownership, in some places it was the great heroes we were looked up to. So there's going to be some element of the most powerful people are in charge, whether it's by deed or through birth or through just wealth. But there's going to be some theme of there are obvious people who have achieved something in some way to be more important or more influential, I should say.
Okay. All right, and then we have the Ignis Guild, which is the Artisan, and that one has presence in plasma, the steam, which is Sakar, Iria, which will be the smoke, so that's fire and air, and then Dragula, which is the lava planet. That planet's gonna be fun. They are based in Iria. And let's see, what are some other things about Ignis to go over? Ignis is the autocracy theme. A lot of the guild stuff still needs to be fleshed out, because all these guild things are going to be kind of the perspective of the storyline, and we haven't got too much into story points or plot points yet because we're still fleshing out the system, the worlds, and all that stuff like that. So there's not a lot of information to go over with the guilds just yet, because those need a lot of work. And then we have the Terrace Guild, which is legislative guild, and that's going to be touching Truinus, the wood, Zed the crystal, Avalon the dust planet, and Dragua again. And then Ventus will be Transit Guild, which we already said, and that one's going to be based on Solaris 8, which is the star base for the Terrans, the humans. That one's going to have an oligarchy theme. Is there any other things to go over with the guilds? I mean, those are still pretty much the basics. Oh, the High Council. So this is still rough tentative, but we were talking about having some kind of High Council that will be kind of the upper echelon of all the guilds. As far as what they're going to do, not quite sure yet. But we had talked about it being run by the Mystics, which I don't know how much I caught you guys up on the thoughts for Mystics, but they are going to be one of the playable races. This might be a good segue to go into some of the races as well then. So in the player handbook side, scroll up here. Lots of playable races that we're going to try to bring into the game. All of these are still using the D&D type names. We may have to be changing up all of these, but we'll just go with it until they're updated. Or not. I said races. That's a class. I'm sorry. So the Mystics are a class, not a race. So how we were running the races and classes and how all that's going to work, players will be able to pick whatever of the playable races that they want. The races come from different home planets, so that'll be part of their backstory. They don't have to be from that planet. They could have some other reason for being off planet, which they would have to come up with in their backstory. But the basic, what the PHB will explain to them is you're from there, and then between them and the GM, they can decide their personal story. But there are millions of people that populate all these planets, and 1 in every 1,000 of people have an elemental affinity. So it'll be somewhat common, but still pretty rare. So many of the NPCs and commoners that fill this system out aren't going to have the magical affinity. And the guilds are going to have a high council, which the thought was ran by mystics, which is one of the classes. But they're going to be very, very powerful and have extra things above and beyond everybody. And they only look for these magical affinity people and only allow those people to join the guild. And they kind of have a stronghold and are kind of the basis for characters becoming adventurers. So you have to have that affinity, which is 1 in 1,000. So all of the PCs that would be in any of the games would be these elemental affinity people. That's going to be kind of a prerequisite for it, and that's what's going to separate you as a quote-unquote adventurer over the commoners, is having that elemental affinity, being able to use the magic that is in the game. And then beyond that, the mystics are 1 in 1,000 of the elemental affinity people. So you're already at 1 in 1,000,000 there's going to be more than 1 million people, but say there's 1 million people in the whole star system, there's only one mystic. So obviously we'll have more than one mystic, so we'll have to figure out scaling up the population, but that'd be a good point to start, is how many mystic class people we want to have in the system totally, and kind of scale it from there, because it's the 1,000. Now that 1,000 number can change. That's just the rough start that we're going with. And the mystics are going to have either telepathy, telekinesis, or teleportation abilities. So they're going to be having some kind of mental connection where they can manipulate with their mind things around above and beyond everybody else. We established that the system is going to be kind of a low magic compared to your traditional fantasy games, but the so and each threshold going from one sphere of magic to the next, they're going to be much bigger jumps, but there's not going to be as many levels. So a lot of there's going to be pretty much magical augmentation to things. It's not going to be like, I'm just a caster. Everyone is a caster of sorts. All adventurers, all of these affinity people will have magical capabilities. All the classes will be other. You'll be focusing on other things, but then having casting on the side with all of them. And then the elemental affinity that you pick for your character. So we'll use Iria, the smoke planet, for instance. So fire and air are the two elements for this world. So when you create your character, you'd have to learn all the races and where they come from. As of right now, Iria, the smoke planet, has gnomes and kobolds that reside from there. So if you picked either one of those, you'd be from this planet. And out of the two available affinities, the fire and the air, you get to pick one of those that your character gets. And then you'll pick your class and you'll roll from there. And as you progress your level, as you get experience, and as you're leveling up your character, you'll be able to either dive further into the affinity that you already picked, or you can go ahead and pick another one. It's going to be part of your story, obviously. You can go into other magics, and those magics can then combine to the outer ring elements. So the ice, smoke, lava, dust, all the outer ones, the combinations of the two. So you can get some pretty interesting spell combinations for elemental affinities as the party levels up, and they're all going to have their own combinations. So, and each of these elemental affinities are going to affect also your class abilities as well. So they'll all have a generic base commonality for everything, but then the elemental affinities will augment that into a specialized kind of way. And as you dive further into one element, you're going to unlock higher versions in that one specific theme, or you can branch out to other elemental affinities changes to the class. So it's going to give a lot of customization possibilities for your character as a player, which is something we were really liking. We've been trying to stick with the theme of 5 for a lot of stuff. You guys will see a lot of that coming up. Okay, so we can come back to classes, or do you guys want to do that now? What do you guys want to work on? Explain.
If you had another thought, we can definitely go that way. Classes is fine because we're on it. Just as a aside, just on the topic of the elements influencing classes.
Sure.
Just to give people the broad lens, the core 5 kind of they've influenced governments and cultures and guilds, so that's going to be permeating throughout. For classes, the main idea is, regardless of whether you're damage dealing melee class or a support kind of idea or a more of a social class. They can all be influenced. They're still that, but with that extra layer of how you approach it. So the idea is if your affinity is fire, it's going to be more harmful effects, damage. So it could enhance the damage dealing capabilities of the melee fighter, but it also might add some underhanded, socially damaging aspects to a more of a bard type, to use a more fantasy example. Air is more about controlling the situation. So
mobility too.
Swapping positions on the battlefield or moving more quickly, or just the idea that you are kind of manipulating events around you to kind of make things more favorable for your team. Earth was the protective element, so taking less damage, increasing armor class, insulating yourself from the negative effects of social actions, those type of things. Lightning was the buff or debuff, so giving temporary bonuses to your side or temporary negatives to the other. And then water was healing based, so recovering from injury. So all of those classes will have their focus, but all of them can be viewed through the lens of the element as well. So you can create a melee type character through a couple different ways, but then also switch it up and go, you know what, I know I'm a guy who's here to hurt the enemy team, but I also have this healing broader view, and that it's going to mechanically make a difference, but also just the idea that that's your element, it's going to, or at least it could or should, influence kind of the character's thought process about how and why you approach situations.
Perfect. Awesome. So it's almost going to be like subclasses in a way, depending on your affinity, but we really don't want to force in to any player characters like you have to do any specific way. That's why we're trying to open up which affinity that they want to start with. There's going to be a little bit of the bottleneck of that's tied to races, but then if you, after reading everything, you understand, I want to start this class with this elemental affinity because of this build, which would require this specific affinity, then you would need to pick one of the races that starts off with that as an option. So it's a little bit of a bottleneck, but you got to have that in games, like where some things can do some things and others can't. It's going to be a lot of work. Go ahead.
Later on, the second affinity, if you choose not to double dip and kind of grow in your original, is open-ended. So your first choice is restricted on race, but any race can end up with any element in the end. They'll be restricted on which combos, because obviously the first one's going to be selected. But if you say, I really want to be that healer lens with the water affinity, but I wanted to be this race that doesn't give me that option, you can still get there, and you can still have that story element of how you think it's going to impact things. It's just going to be a growth rather than initial.
And we also got to figure out how that's going to work in game as well. Would you have to have exposure to that guild to be able to get that affinity? That's something we still got to work out of how systemly you would do that to go in a direction your character would want, since we're designing this to be modular. Or you could run them all, or you could kind of hodgepodge it. So that is something we're going to have to cross as well. So say they're running in the fire book and somebody is from Zed, the crystal planet, which has earth or lightning, and let's say they go with lightning and they're running in the fire book, they would have lots of access to dip into fire affinity, since that's the guild perspective that the story is going to follow in that module. Is it going to be just fire chances for fire, or they are going to be going to these other planets that do touch all the other elements, so there would be opportunities that way to be exposed to those other planetary elements, but it's going to be focusing on the one guild's perspective, so we're going to have to figure out how that would work. I'm I think we shouldn't restrict it to just that one element that you could dip into.
We'll have to make it make sense narratively and just how you could acquire it, but I think the guilds are interconnected enough that
Mm-hmm.
we should be able to find a way to say, okay, yeah, through your connections
Mm-hmm.
to this person over in the Lightning Guild, you can acquire that element during this stretch of missions.
Right. I think a lot of that can be delved into in the Game Master's Guide. So there'll be enough about all of it so where you wouldn't need to get all 5 modules to be able to run a game. If your players and the Game Master has a PHB just to see how mechanically the game works and how you build a character and what all those decisions mean and how you could play. Um, if the Game Master's Guide had enough information about all of it on a generic standpoint, so that way they could just grab one module and the modules would focus on the content essentially. More fleshed out details about the actual missions and quests and NPCs and stuff like that. But in the Game Master's Guide, it would flesh out each of the planets fully, so you'll have a generic understanding of how all of them work and how they all affect each other in the general gist. But then we wouldn't want the Game Master Guide to be too thick, so we would then flesh out each of those planets more on the module side. Okay. Man, do we go to classes, races, or planets?
So many
I think-
options.
I think if we do classes, now whether we do it first or
Mhm.
last, I think planets and races are so well tied together that we can kind of go through the planets and then talk about the races that live there as we do it.
Sure. All right, let's do planets then. All right. There's no outline for us going through everything, so bear with us. We're just kind of just getting everybody caught up, and then we'll eventually get to future developments. All right, planets. They're organized in the book alphabetically. So I get that's as good as any order to go into. So in the book so far, I don't know how well you guys can read everything that's on there, but we'll eventually put links for everybody to be able to see this and stuff like that. So some of the stuff in the books has been typed out. A lot of it just says filler. They're all one page right now. They're eventually going to be many pages of details for all of it. We have a lot of it in our Roll20 game that hasn't been put into the books yet. It's something I've been working on. But let's just dive into the planet of Avalon, which is the dust planet. So it's going to be kind of like a Tatooine-y kind of planet. So it's going to have the affinities of earth and air. Ben, you've been having the most hands in on this planet. Do you want to give the basic rundown of what we've developed for this planet thus far?
Sure. So this planet, guild presence, Terrace and Ventus have a primary composition on this planet. It is a planet of dust. It's a planet of ruin. It's been dealing with a plague, which we got into a little bit earlier. It's been dealing with a plague that has been going on for roughly 200 years, depending on our time frame.
Mm-hmm.
Currently no known cure, but Truinus is able to grow that plant to make the medicine for him. Without that medicine, the what we are calling the Orcs and the Dark Arts currently, they inhabit Avalon, and if they don't get the medicine, they think that they are going to die.
Mm.
So pretty much the entirety of this planet's economy is designed to providing supplies for both themselves and Truinus. And in trade, Truinus gives them a constant supply of this medicine.
Mm-hmm.
So it creates a very symbiotic economic relationship between the two planets. Um, Alvalon is, again, a planet of dust, ruin, deserts, not a lot of greenery on it, and so they're not able to grow a whole lot above ground. Um, so they're not able to grow those plants from Truinus themselves, hence why they have to rely on them a lot. And so uh, if the inhabitants of Alvalon don't get their medicine, we currently have it set to every 3 days. Um, if they don't go without if they don't get their medicine within those 3 days, they start going into extreme like withdrawal symptoms,
Mm-hmm.
um, which are painful, and it causes them to try and get relief any way necessary. Um, Touched on a little bit of the truth that um, Truinus actually had a cure, but some enterprising figure had the idea of modifying the formula, and essentially giving them a drug instead of the cure. And that's how it's been for 200 years. Um, so all of these inhabitants of Avalon, um, none of them actually have the plague anymore, but they're addicted to the drug. They're addicted to the medicine that they've been given. And so you have wealthy nobles that hold power over the poor, um,
Mm.
and the poor are forced to do a bunch of laborious work and tasks. They're the ones that uh, raise livestock. They're in mines, various industrial projects that are going on, um, so that they can provide the needed supplies for both of the planets. Um, there is a class system based on income within the planet, um, and your income is based on the family that you were born into. So even if someone can pull themselves out of poverty, your name is so connected, and the class status is so connected to your name,
Mm.
um, that you're still going to be considered lower class. It's very hard for people in Avalon to rise above their station. Um, the highest class makes up the non-elected officials, so they dictate policies, laws. Um, they control shipments of the medicine from Twinnis, and in turn, they utilize that to control the lower class into working for them.
Mm.
The higher class that a family is, the more medicine they have access to. So, a sign of nobility is the frequency of doses that are taken, um, and possibly even the way it's taken. Um, so, what essentially winds up happening is that you have the lower class uh, going much longer periods between doses,
Mm.
and so again, they go back to doing whatever they can to try and you know get over these withdrawals for this drug. Um, and so that's how the higher class is able to control who essentially who works and who doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's how they keep a thumb on uh, the lower class. Um, the inhabitants of Avalon are known for their expertise in hunting and tracking. Um, because their culture is focused on hunting, they make some of the best bounty hunters in the known galaxy.
Mm-hmm.
The highest profile bounties are brought to the nobles, and they are known to rarely fail a bounty. The hunters can take their bounty reputation so seriously that failing to get a mark is going to bring an intense amount of shame. Um, and so they essentially become outcasts until they can finish that mark, until they can get that bounty resolved, before they even come back.
Mm.
Um, you have one subset, the dark orcs that live on the surface of the planet, and then you have orcs that live underground. Um, the orcs that live underground, they maintain archives for a system of tunnels within the planet. Um, and they grow these bioluminescent mushrooms so that, it's still well lit down there. Um, but they also grow various types of, lichen, mushrooms, underground herbs, and such.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and they take great pride in their own personal gardens of this stuff. You can have vast estates from the nobles that live below ground where it's just giant, bioluminescent gardens.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the orcs that live below ground have come up with a way of using some of the medicine that Truanus gives them, um, and they have concocted a way of putting it into some of the plant matter that they then trade with the dark orcs above. And when the dark orcs feed that material to, uh, we haven't created a name for them for the creatures yet, but they're essentially like these giant bovine creatures.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but when the lichen is fed to them, when this material is fed to them, they grow to exponential sizes, creating another avenue uh, of trade that Avalon is able to partake in. Um, the dark orcs on the surface take the medicine in its base form, but they feed those special mushrooms um, to the livestock. So the meat exports are extremely profitable. A majority of their livestock goes to feeding the people of Truinus, but they do uh, trade it with other planets as well for various tech and needs. Um, yeah, that's currently what we have.
Okay.
Um, yeah.
What about because we're having to look at like the whole timeline too. So that's something that we are going to be putting together is how long, how many years civilization's been. Is it hundreds, thousands? Is it hundreds of thousands? So what we're going to eventually do is kind of pan out the actual timeline of when these civilizations started comparatively to each other, when did technology get to the point where they now are connected to each other, so they all have kind of a like a backstory for the planet and the civilizations, and then based on from that point of once they all get connected and the guilds are established and they can all trade and meet each other. So we'll have to come up with each of the, you know, the people of Avalon, once the technology is either developed there or comes to them from the other one, how that initial confrontation is, meeting these alien races. So that's something we're going to have to go through and flesh out as well. Um, is it just one moment of huge technological boom? Is it magical? Is it a wormhole? Is it faster than light travel? So we're gonna have to come up with that, but there'll be some explosion of it where I'm assuming it'll be kind of like a 1, 2, and then a boom. Of they all become connected, and then it's going to be the melting pot feeling of now all of these planets and races and cultures now have access to each other, and they're going to very quickly start affecting each other, both positively and negatively. So that's going to be a really fun venture to get into, is how they feel about each other, and the things that they could benefit and the problems that they cause. Obviously, some inhabitants of worlds are going to naturally get along with other ones very, very well, and then some of them also have aversions to each other. It could be because of worldview differences. It could be because of political agendas. It could be religious. It could be magical reasons. Um, could be for many different things, and some of them will have more natural ties as well. Some of the planets we have, like some of the peoples, like from Dragua, the kobolds, which we'll get to when we get to that planet, are from Dragua, but now they all are in Iria. So we'll flesh all of that out more as well. But so there's still a lot of work to do on all these planets, but we have kind of a tentative bit of world backstory for Avalon, which may change. But what do we have so far for that portion? For the why Avalon's a dust planet and the separation between the orcs, the dark orcs. Again, all the names might change from orc and dark orc and stuff, but just kind of working titles for now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So we've discussed Avalon quite a bit. So let's see. There, many years and years and years ago, there was a bunch of kingdoms, and like Avalon was originally a very almost tropical planet. They had a lot of forested areas. They had above ground seas, typical standard livable surface.
Mm-hmm.
However, um, these cities, they spread across the planet, and they thrived under the rule of one of the old orc emperors, or kings, whatever we decide to go with. Um, it was rumored that his power was so great and his connection to the planet was so great that he was able to raise the palace of stone and silver with like a flick of his wrist. Granted, that's rumor. We know, and we've been discussing the magic system currently,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't reach to that extent. So, but during his reign, things remained peaceful on his planet. And there was the occasional argument over taxes or other matters. Um, but he always held firm and did what was best for his people. But near the end of his reign is when the Offworlders began to arrive. And they initially brought things like new textiles, new foods, technologies, and literature. But Uritan was the king. Orc was very curious, and he absorbed all of these tales, these stories that all of these books and this literature contained. And he learned of different worlds and different people, and he welcomed them all with open arms. He was very much into sharing the land and
Mm-hmm.
resources for an equal exchange. He had a bunch of libraries built, and he encouraged his people to expand past their comforts and embrace this new technology that these off-worlders were offering. Um, he also made a habit of traveling off-world to visit planets and personally learn of the people that he was reading about. And so during these travels, he would leave probably a council in charge to make decisions and handle the day-to-day business. But as his travels increased, so did the power and the reach of the council. And it wasn't long before the council began to overreach, and tensions between the off-worlders and the orcs grew, um, probably creating wars and battles and such as a result. But in his travels, the king had become close friends with the leader of Othea, the planet of storms, um,
Mm-hmm.
and had made a habit of going to their universities and libraries and such for research. And it was here that he learned of a star relatively close to his home planet of Alvalon. Um, and he had compared the star charts from Othea to the ones from his own planet and had realized the difference. Um, and he also discovered in his readings that that star was pretty close to going supernova. So he brought all of this information to his friend, the leader of Athea, and they worked out an agreement to give Alvalon uh, the schematics for a piece of technology that they had developed
Mm-hmm.
that allows them to control their atmosphere. Um, so the leader of Avalon had made haste back to his own planet, and could see that since he's been gone, like a lot of stuff has happened, and the council has taken over and ripped control of the people um, from this king figure, this leader,
Mm.
uh, turned the people against him essentially and blamed him for all the troubles that the off-worlders had caused. So he pleaded with them to listen to him, um, but a lot of them had already become so ingrained with the council that they just turned away from him. They turned a deaf ear to his warnings, but there was still a loyal group, um, and they secreted him away and kept him safe. And they listened to him and to his warnings, and so they began work on building the same type of a device that Othea had, so that they could help control the atmosphere and possibly try to protect all of their people.
Mm.
But time grew short, and the star was going to supernova pretty soon. A drought had already, by that point, spread across Avalon. Many of the native plants and animals had already begun to die. So he instructed his loyal followers to spread word to as many of the other orcs as they could to get beneath the earth, the surface, to shield from any possible radiation that was going to wash over the planet when that star died. Um, when the star exploded, uh, there were like huge waves of fire that just ran across the sky as the atmosphere had begun to burn up. Uh, no orc alive is sure exactly what happened, whether it was an act of sacrifice or a technological malfunction. But the fire was funneled down onto the palace where the leader had built this atmospheric control.
Mm-hmm.
And when the fire cleared, all that remained of the palace was like obsidian and melted silver. No trace of the leader remained. Gone. And so to this day, uh, a lot of the orcs, they consider that a holy site almost. It's very sacred to them.
Mm.
But the people that heeded the warnings of the leader survived, but their survival came at a great cost. Their world was now completely changed. The seas had boiled away, most of the vegetation had been engulfed, and their cities had been burned and destroyed. Just everything wiped out. In the aftermath of the near destruction of their planet, the remaining orcs were afflicted by the plague.
Mm.
Um, so we had Trinus come in at that point.
And we were
Deal with
saying
that.
the plague came from the people of Truinus because they had it and they brought it to the planet. So that could be a whole spiel
Yeah,
of how it happened and how it was transmitted, and then the widespread, um, across their peoples. And if they're all very close quartered kind of a people, maybe that would make it spread really quickly. Like if they're all nomadic tribes on the surface or all in caves down together, maybe not just ventilated well. You know what I mean? I think it would be pretty plausible that it would spread very quickly. Yeah.
oh, definitely. Um, Above ground, you have. Um, we were talking about having the dark orcs live above ground, um, possibly living. They have nomadic tribes where they follow around these large herds of these bovine creatures.
Mm-hmm.
Some possibly live in some of the ruins that dot Alvalon. Um, they have direct contact with off-worlders, and so they've reestablished trade agreements with them after everything had happened, um, and so they deal a lot with the outside presence. Then you have the um, regular orcs that live below ground, and they live in these giant carved out kingdoms beneath the surface,
Mm-hmm.
protecting these secret vaults that they've created because they trade access to these vaults with off-worlders so that the off-worlders can store their secrets or wealth or
Mm-hmm.
whatever beneath the surface in exchange for goods and services. So uh, the orcs below ground, they deal with a lot of the actual farming that takes place on Avalon in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
But they also lean more towards academic pursuits, tending. Um, they have a lot of the stores of knowledge that were kept in the libraries. Whatever they could get below ground before everything happened, they were able to pull. So they have a lot of knowledge base down there. Um,
And then
but
the
yeah,
vaults were kind of well known throughout the system once
yep.
they all got connected with all the other planets. That'll tie into the kobolds, which we'll get to when we make full circle around. But that's a tie to Avalon with their vault system and securing important things for people who were wealthy enough to afford it from other planets. Awesome. Good job. So that's the basis for Avalon. There is a little bit more, but we'll try to uh, bust through these planets pretty quickly. Good stuff, man. I love it. All right, so the next alphabetical one would be Dragua, which is the lava planet. So that has the elemental affinities of fire and earth. Um, Joe, you comfortable enough to go over? Or do you want me to?
I'm certainly comfortable enough, but you're the one who put the work in on Dragua, so if you're feeling like it's your baby, you can talk about it.
No,
Otherwise, I'm happy
go
to get
for it.
into
Yeah, that way we can kind of spread out the who's talking stuff a little bit.
All right, let me pull up Dragua. So,
Dragua.
the planet of fire and earth, home to dwarves and originally kobolds. But long before that, Dragua was ruled over by fire giants and red dragons, or whatever our equivalent of those ends up being. Um, each of them had kind of enslaved the lesser races. The fire giants had the dwarves in their domain, and the dragons were, I guess we wouldn't really decide if they were worshipped by kobolds or if they were just slaves as well.
Sure.
But giants initiated global combat against the dragons. The reason is why, whether we kind of like the name is something that we discovered or just lost to time, and the dragons kind of were forced to retaliate to defend themselves, and global war ensued. The giants, with the dwarves manning them, were known for just these massive, incredible forges that were magically heated to beyond anything anyone else is capable of, being able to kind of forge incredible things and massive things at the same time. The losses were large on both sides, but the giants were pulling ahead, so the largest and most powerful dragons had all been hunted down and killed, which left one younger dragon who is now kind of the forced leader of all the remaining dragons. Had reached out to a dwarven prisoner who escaped enslavement and kind of begged the dragons to help, because they didn't want the giants either. So if they could help break out the other dwarves, then suddenly the dragons would have the dwarves and kobolds all on their side versus just the giants. He convinced the leading dragon that if she helped, with his knowledge, attack that prison, it would overall win the war, and the dwarves would help kill the fire giant king. It was going to be a heavy loss. It was the most fortified position, but eventually they decided that that was the only way they were going to kill the giant king. And she added the caveat, if we're going to do this, we're going to get rid of all the giants. We have to completely end this once and for all. They agreed on that. He kind of gave her the ins and outs of the prison, and they got all the younger dragons under her rule for the final fight, granting the original dwarven prisoner the kind of one-time honor of riding a dragon into battle as they freed the dwarves and turned on the giants, overwhelming them now that there was just nobody on their team. And they slaughtered all the fire giants, keeping their word. Um, the only surviving dragon from that conflict was this new queen, and the kind of concept for our dragons, rather than just time, kind of scaling them up to familiar terms of younger, elder, adult age, and they, through experience and combat, kind of grew in scale and kind of enter similar concept to the Norse idea of the Odin sleep,
Exactly.
where they have to hibernate and kind of evolve. And this slaughtering of all the giants definitely got her to that stage.
Charmander is evolving.
It's a long 1,000-year sleep, or whatever number we assign to it. And so there's going to be no dragons left until that time she comes back. So she kind of chose a massive volcano to bed down as a safe place to kind of go through that transformation. But she made a deal with the king of the dwarves, who had now kind of taken over, and asked him to take care of her eggs. She had many, many eggs, and they needed time to kind of grow and hatch and become strong and kind of foster that return to dragons. He, on the spot, the dwarves were free, the giants were gone, they were in a position of power, and agreed to take care of those eggs. She kind of told him the thing that hatches a dragon egg is heat. Normally there are mother dragons around to provide that, get things going. She kind of told him how to initiate that process, but also warned him that young dragons aren't immune to fire. That is something that is gained over time. So she kind of warned him, hey, don't overdo it. We're going to get there. And when I return and the giants are gone, the dragons are back, we'll have a strong alliance between dragons and dwarves. The dwarves kind of embraced the new king, brought back the forges, kind of built a new society. But they kind of found that the forges would work, but they weren't any more special than any other forge.
I kind of picture it like on How to Train Your Dragon. You know, where the they have like that symbiotic relationship of them riding the dragons. They have like this community. So that's kind of like the promised lifestyle when she returns. Yeah.
The utopian future where everybody gets to team up with the dragon.
Exactly.
It's like a super cool concept. But when they were trying to get those forges working, they kind of found that they wouldn't work the way they did when they were forced to work them with the giants, no matter what they did. But they worked, they forged, they lived until they decided to try and start hatching those dragon eggs. They inserted an egg into the forge, but the construction of the forge, whether it was an accident or a planned trap that they did not know about beforehand, the egg hatched, but the hatchling couldn't get freed, and eventually kind of exploded into a magical fire inside the forge, which ignited it to the full power of its previous time with the giants, and kind of discovering that it was maybe why the giants wanted to get a bunch of dragon eggs. It was the secret to their success, and with the forge and the power that it provided them. So the dwarves, realizing that they had unfettered access to the fuel that ran the forges and had a way to kind of dominate the planet for themselves and kind of grow to prominence, they decided maybe we don't hatch these dragon eggs and we just keep the eggs safe, keep the forge running. So they didn't want to become the giants in the sense that slavery of being so inherently a problem for themselves. They kicked the kobolds off the planet. They didn't say, we're not going to turn you into what you were, but this is us. This is ours now. So they kind of left. They ended up, that's many boxes left on Iria, Smoke Planet. But they've been chugging along ever since. They grew to prominence and wealth with weapons and strong alloys of metal that no one else can touch. But time ticked on. and whatever number we give it, 1,000 years, 10,000 years, the day of the dragon is coming.
Mm-hmm.
So in the meantime, they've made this great society of wealth and power, but they're going to have to deal with a newly more powerful dragon that's going to wake up and see that the eggs have not been hatched, the dragons have not returned, and the dwarves have betrayed her.
Right. Awesome. Perfect. So it's gonna be blended between republic and dictatorship for the planet. We're still figuring out how the government structure of the dwarves are gonna be. But as we're fleshing out the backstory for these planets, we're also trying to kind of plan what each of the modules will focus on for the plot story devices for each of the planets. So the Mama Dragon coming back is the thought for the plot device for the Fire Book when it touches on Dragua, and then with the Earth Book will also touch on Dragua, so that'll have a different aspect, which will tie into the eggs, which we'll kind of get to. So still trying to plan out exactly what all is going to be in the modules, but fleshing out the backstory, the history of the planets is definitely going to help give us a vision for all of it. Hey Kyle, glad you can make it. Hopefully you can stay for a bit. Just going over everything for everybody. Trying to get everyone caught up on all the lore for everything that we've been working on for the last few months. We went over the planets Avalon and Dragua. Thanks for hitting that up, Joe. Next on the list is Iria. So that is the smoke planet, which has influences of fire and air to make the smoke. The races present for this planet is going to be the gnomes, which are from the planet, and then now the kobolds after they were kicked off of Dragua from the dwarves. We'll have to, of course, with a big timeline, figure out when that was. Obviously, it would need to be after planetary travel had been established, but we'll get all that figured out. So the kobolds go there, and that from when that happened to when the game takes place, there had been some time. So we're still trying to figure out exactly what the kobolds have done on Iria, which we haven't figured out, but we do know that they were trying to procure some of the eggs from the dwarves, the dragon eggs on Dragua, with trying to bring back the dragons, hopefully, to be able to reclaim their rightful place on Dragua. So them settling on Iria probably would be not what they want. They want their planet back. And so their plan would be to maybe utilize the dragons to be able to do that. So they were smuggling out some of the eggs, whether they are or not, still we got to develop it, but that's the plan. Is they're smuggling the eggs, maybe some insider dwarves paying them off or something, and they are storing the dragon eggs in the vaults on Avalon. So you can start to kind of see how we're trying to tie all the planets together to where different modules will be able to touch on the other planets. So the Earth side of Avalon book will touch on them having those, while in the Fire book, on the Iria side, it goes into the kobolds' dealings of actually smuggling those out. But we still have a lot to develop for the kobolds. But we have some work done for the gnomes and how they're going to be on Iria. So the thought is kind of having their race be very divided based on gender. So the females are kind of the ones that are in power. So they have an Empress Gnome that rules over the world and are very sexist against the males. And that's going to carry over to their mindset once the planet starts to connect with other planets, that sexism is going to go over. Some of the races might not have genders, but the ones that do, in contact with them, they're always going to be favoring um, female of the other races. So a lot of the like ambassadors from other planets and stuff, they choose their strong female types to deal with um, the gnome leadership on the planet, just because that's the only people that they'll deal with. All this again is tentative change, but that's what we have so far. So this Empress Gnome is going to hold no actual authority, but it is more for ceremonial practices. So it's kind of like the Queen of England kind of a thing, where no actual power, but holds very big significance culturally, and for all the ceremonial practices. But she's going to be the biggest celebrity on the entire planet, and all the women on the planet are obsessed with everything she does. So think of it kind of like a Kardashian kind of a thing, like huge influencer. Whatever she wears quickly trends into fashion. Whatever she says becomes the pop culture gossip. Whichever male subordinate she's currently mating with becomes what the wealthy, noble women, gnomes, would think would be attractive in males. So we'll have a outline of kind of like the trends and how everything will definitely change. Much of the culture will revolve around her. But she's going to be kind of a young and naive, silver spoon in the mouth kind of character. And the elite noble class will be trying to use this to her advantage. And they'll be positioning themselves as kind of being her wisdom and advisors surrounding her, but they're actually trying to manipulate her to showcase their own lobbying interests. And because she's young and naive, she's going to be kind of just going along with it, unaware more. So they'll keep putting her in the spotlight for, all the attention. So she just kind of blindly does what they want. So we're going to flesh that out more of what their culture all is and what exactly that they do. And the gnomes are going to be very big into technology, and because their planet is a smoky planet, just naturally, elementally, but also on the industrial side, it's going to be kind of a shitty planet as far as like what it looks like physically. And because of this, the gnomes seek technology as kind of an escape. And so the idea was that they got kind of like a virtual reality or augmented reality setup that quickly, once they got introduced to the planet, these are kind of like a race of very habitual, addictive personality peoples. And this technology was mass distributed to all of the gnomes on the planet. And so they walk around with these AR, VR, rose-colored glasses, essentially, which will put them into this kind of video game type world, kind of like on Ready Player One, where people have just kind of dove into this alternate simulated reality, which is way more important than their real lives. So they only do the real life stuff just to be able to maintain their presence in this game. So that'll be a really interesting concept for PCs to come into, seeing all these gnomes walking around playing this, massive MMO. It's like a social game that they're all going to be completely consumed in, and that will kind of encapsulate most of their social structure. And obviously, like that gnome empress will also have a presence in this game, so they'll all be sucking up to her in real life, but then also in the game as well. And all of that gear was sold to them from Sakaar, which is the steam planet, which we'll get to later. But what we established is, because the male gnomes or ostracized, and just instantly put at the bottom. The most powerful male would fall under the lowest female from their perspective. And once this interplanetary connections start getting made and the male gnomes see how it is on other planets, how they're not treated this way, they're equals. They're going to be trying to establish their own presence to be able to try to take back over what's they feel is rightfully theirs. And they kind of establish this underground black market. And because of the thousands of years of established regime of the female gnomes, they have to keep it secret, but they have to finance this. And so they dive into augmentation, physical augmentations, and it all gets dealt in this underground black market, which will spread out to other areas like the plasma area. But the playable characters and other NPCs who want to incorporate technology to augment their body, like cyborgish ways, or like what's another word for it? Body augmentations, like getting a prosthetic robotic arm or an eyepiece that can do other things like that. That's going to be done on area by the male gnomes. So people will travel to that planet for those cases, and they're going to be doing their R&D, their research and development in the plasma area on a lot of the prisoners, which are overseen by the Terrans, the humans, which we'll get to when we full circle around to that. So they're using all of that to try to build up wealth to back, let's see. So they are submissive in public, but in private they are ambitious and plot to overthrow the monarchy by throwing all of their black market wealth behind one specific male gnome character, which we still need to develop. So that's their plans, is to take back power, or not take back because I never had it, but to accumulate it and flip the roles. All right, that is the gist of Iria, the smoke planet. Next on the list is Othea. Do you want to take up Othea, Ben?
Yeah. So Othea is the storm planet. Let's see. Yeah. So the elves lived in this dynasty empire, which utilizes this unknown tech magic combination to alter the natural storm energy around the planet, essentially making their capital domain completely unaffected by any of the storms that plague the planet as a whole. But it also intensifies the storms around the perimeter of the area, making it almost an impervious defense system. It has this electromagnetic field around it that makes starships unable to enter without the dynasty granting them specific permission, so that they can manipulate the eye of the storm and stretch it up to the atmosphere to create a safe tunnel for the ships to come down into the capital. The lore of the elves tells a story of this ancient dynasty emperor that had two sons. Traditionally, the eldest is the one that received the birthright of succeeding his father. However, the oldest child also grew up extremely entitled and self-assured, and pretty much expected this legacy to be his by birthright. It wasn't long before he became corrupted and power-hungry, and while the younger brother remained in his studies and kind of humbled himself to his father and all of his teachings. The older brother spent his days with politicians and concubines, assuming that his rule was inevitable, while the younger sought out mentors and tutors. And when the time came for the coronation, in front of this entire dynasty, the emperor was going to appoint his successor, excuse me, his successor. Everyone assumed, as was the tradition for thousands of years prior to this, that the eldest son was going to be named. However, the emperor proposed this secession by trial proposition, causing them both to agree to a series of tests in front of all of Elvenkind, and the winner would be appointed uh, as the next emperor. Um,
Mhm.
the older brother, insulted by his father, not allowing or not following traditional standards, cursed his name before everyone. Um, but he accepted the challenge um, due to his pride, making him think that he could beat his younger brother in any challenge. Typical older brother.
Mhm.
Um, he did beat him in the physical tests, which went first, so he became overconfident as the day went on. His arrogance led him to belittle his little brother and slander him with taunts um, with every victory. Um, so at midday, the test changed to more intellectual uh, nature tests,
Mhm.
and the youngest brother began winning. Um, the older brother, was getting angrier and angrier um, after every failed test. Um, and it became apparent to all of the elves that were watching the test that no one really wanted the older brother to rule,
Mm.
and so they started cheering on the younger brother because he was much more humble with each of his victories. He was a very good sportsman like that. After an entire day of tests and trials, the end result was a tie, and the emperor, in front of all of his people, announced his younger son to be the successor for his sportsmanship, compassion, dedication to study. Um, the older brother, he became furious with his father, and as he was lowering the crown upon his little brother's head, the oldest son rushed forward and stole the crown and placed it on his own. Assuming command followed the crown, he ordered the Imperial Guards to kill his younger brother in anger.
Mm.
The younger brother slowly stood to his feet and said that dynasty law dictates the emperor isn't the one who wears the crown, but wins the heart of his people. The older brother continued to order the guards to kill his younger brother as he walked forward and addressed his new dynasty. Let's see. My brother, I believe we have a little bit of the speech that was recorded, written down. My brother was prepared to have me killed before all of you out of ignorance and jealousy. It is my decision and first act as your new emperor to sentence my brother. At that point, the little brother turned to the older brother, uh, and the older brother fell to his knees, assuming that he was about to be killed. For treason is a capital offense.
Mhm.
He had too much pride to beg for any forgiveness or mercy, and so was just willing to be executed. However, the younger brother had him seized and be publicly killed and let it go all the way up until the final moment where he stopped it. So essentially, he had his brother there, um, and he was, you know, axe to the back of the head type stuff, but stopped right beforehand. And he addressed the people and decreed that his brother was to be spared, but banished from the dynasty. Himself and any of his descendants were forever forbidden from entering the capital city ever again.
Mhm.
Um, the older brother's descendants became the Dark Elves, um, and they, of course, were forbidden from the capital, while the younger brother's people maintained the elven kind within the Eye of the Storm.
Mhm.
Um, the elves turned their focus on increasing their intelligence to the point of developing the technology that kept their dynasty in the eye of the planet's continuous storm. And the older brother's people turned to the dark side of the planet and began evolving over time to adjust to the extreme differences there to survive. Now, the Dark Elves are very different from their elven cousins and harbor a deep hatred that has passed down throughout the generations, hoping to one day retake their rightful place as the rulers of their original family's dynasty.
And I think we were talking about maybe having Othea, whatever star it revolves around in the system, the it does one revolution per rotation, so one half of the planet is always in the light and the other half is in the dark. Um, I don't know if scientifically that's doable. If is that too slow for a planet to rotate? Um, so we'll do some research into that. But that's kind of the thought. So that way the dark half that is in the darkness is constant, and that way that could kind of branch out the physical differences that would adapt in the dark elf side, the older brother excuse me descendants, to be sensitive to light but really good in the dark and stuff like that, kind of akinning them to elves versus drow, but kind of doing our own spin on it. Awesome. And then so sometime on the timeline, whichever emperor was in charge of the elves, whether it be this younger brother or one of his kids, would be the one that pairs up with the ruler of Avalon that you're talking about to give them the technology to try to help save their planet when that one star went supernova. So we got to figure out when in the timeline that's going to be, but that's where they got it from. So that would be after they make contact. We had also talked about the the dynasty capital, whatever it is that is in the eye, because this whole Othea planet is completely consumed in storms because of the water and lightning elements mixing and all that stuff. That technology that they have, they can open up starship access to the outer parts of the atmosphere, so all of the outer planet contact that does come to the planet would have to come to the capital, so it would make the elves the controlling race of the planet as far as other external planetary thing. But we don't want to have the dark elves not be off planet. So we'll have to figure out how that is, whether it's smuggling or I don't know. Maybe it's outside of the capital or something, because if the dark elves can't go into the capital because they're forbidden, if we have that touchdown place maybe be obviously within the eye of the storm, but not necessarily in the dynasty territory. Does that make sense? Maybe it's sacred and they don't want off-worlders going into their dynasty capital. So if the touchdown place is just outside of that, then that would give the Dark Elves the ability to maybe get off planet.
Yeah.
Well, my original thought on that, not to get too far into development,
Sure.
lore dumping, was the idea that the elder brother, who did not pay attention in class on the level he should have, had some knowledge of the technology and some records of it, but not fully. So that they developed with what they had. Essentially, instead of being able to control the storm in a large area, they found a way to adapt to it. So essentially, a dark elf ship can move through the storm, but they are not overly large. Be adaptable to that storm's presence. So they kind
so like small little jump ships.
Essentially, yeah, they kind of bootleg their own way in and out of the system, and slowly have kind of had a presence in other places. So I'm sure the first time an elf and a dark elf saw each other off planet, they were both like, "But how?"
Awesome. Okay.
But we'll nail that down as we continue on.
Perfect. All right, so the next jump is going to be going to Sakar, but before we do that, we're going to take a quick break. Hope everybody's having a lot of fun. We're glad you're here, Kyle. Feel free to throw in all of your thoughts in the chat. We'll be watching it. But yeah, we're gonna take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll jump into the planet of Sakaar. All right, we are back. Thanks for sticking with us. I think the stream accidentally dropped there for a second, but should be good to go now. All right, we left off getting ready to lead into Sakar, which is the steam planet. It's going to have the affinities of water and fire. And Joe, I believe you were going to dive into that one for us.
Let's do it. Sakar. Haha. So, Sakar is home to the Cuddle. They are aquatic in nature. The story at the moment is that abandoned Terran researchers, not researchers, the research stations were abandoned by the researchers. But a malfunction or accident or something led to a leak in their generators, kind of irradiating the oceans on this world, leading to the massive development, just rapid changes in these fish. They just kind of generation over generation, rapid life cycles led to kind of the jumpstart in the development of life and civilization. And with a lot of abandoned technology left behind, it was kind of the concept was as if life started gaining sentience, but just kind of jumped to the industrial age.
Mm-hmm.
So they're kind of dependent on this radiated water. They live in it, they need it to survive. But using abandoned Terran suits, they kind of started with this first clunky interface where they could leave the water, but by having their own little tiny habitat inside the suit, and use those to kind of build on the concept and develop further. The planet is tied pretty strongly to Dragua. They use those metals to build their suits, their machines, their war engines, and those shipments are kind of what develops their whole culture and are highly guarded on the way, to the point that only once has any shipment to Sakar been intercepted and taken. That was a Terran kind of rogue agent who kind of did that, which led to the Sakarians heading up an assault on Terra, Earth, going to kind of go wipe them out. But the dying star that was alluded to in Alvalon's background was Earth's star. It overloaded, supernovaed as the Sakarians came to come wipe them out.
Mm-hmm.
So their forces were decimated, and they're now living on the reputation that was an intentional move by Sakar. So they haven't done it since, but they kind of like, anytime, guys, we could hit the button. So they are still receiving the massive shipments. They're rebuilding their numbers and their kind of war engines to try and get back to a point where they're safe. So they're living in a state of vulnerability with perceived invulnerability as the largest threat that has kind of ever existed. Do we have images of the suits in the book?
Not in the book, no.
Okay. So the concept that we've kind of landed on for the Sakarian world is that most of the surface, there's maybe kind of one point where people come heavily regulated by the Sakarians, because if they go in the wrong area, they're going to see through the lie that we're still the top might. So there are a couple areas, or just the one where it's developed, people could stay there. There's a point to interact with other races who are not usually permitted on the planet's surface, whereas a lot of their existence is on planet underwater. They will have developed cities and kind of defenses and civilization in an underwater environment where they kind of 9 to 5 hop in a suit, go do work, and then return home to the water. So much of the surface is undeveloped or is in ruins from the Terrans abandoning things. And there's certain areas, which is the one that's kind of developed and highly futuristic. This is going to have kind of that steampunky feel where it's future tech, but as if somebody who just discovered technology was kind of designing it, so some of it's big and bulky. They've gone through multiple iterations already because they live quickly, so they're constantly building on the knowledge of the previous generation
Mm-hmm.
who are coming up quick. But they live essentially when they're on the water in this kind of bubble.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of gets put into a suit. So they've got kind of a smaller one that'll interact with the world through various limbs. It's kind of quick and nimble, can be utilized for a lot of different tasks. They've got a larger suit that's more humanoid in shape. That's kind of more of a traditional human mech look,
Mm-hmm.
where it'd be kind of able to interact with things built for people with the kind of fairly standard set of limbs and
Mm-hmm.
extremities, and a little more sturdy. And then larger engines of war that they can kind of go in and pilot on a more intuitive level. It's kind of a inherent link to their technology because it's running off the same kind of radiation that they're living on. It just kind of gives them an interface that other people can't get to.
Mm-hmm.
So they've got, that's the war machines people were already terrified of before the exploding star rumors.
Mm.
The Sakari technology to have done that. Those are something that will probably be reserved for the Sakar section on planet. Maybe if you play a cuddle, you might get to interact with one on planet, but they're kind of big, bulky, expensive. They're not something that a player is going to be able to keep,
Mm-hmm.
but it's still something that's very cool world-wise, and hopefully a chance to play your card bugs, interact with one, you get to feel how cool it is, but it's not standard, whereas normally you'll be living in this suit. So it gives the cuddle a very interesting lifestyle as a
Mm-hmm.
player, because there's going to be some inherent risks. You're in an environment, you need the concept of being in space without a suit for us. Um, Anything happens to that suit, well, now we got problems that we have to immediately address.
Sure.
But they, like I said, they're very attached to Dragua by needing that constant metal. But kind of their early versions of their suits and the way they interacted with things is what they adapted to be usable by the gnomes of Iria, and kind of just to fund their acquisition of metals and materials, they kind of started selling that to them. So we've already got them tied to several other planets, and of course the actual conflict with Terra when there was still a planet in the plasma.
Mm-hmm. And I think the cuddle would probably hold the Terrans, the humans, whatever we're going to call them, probably in a very high regard, because they're kind of the precursory race that led to their development. So that might be a fun kind of spin to how Cuddle would feel about humans, since they kind of came from their accident. But we're definitely going to work out the Cuddle to be different on the class side. I think we're going to have racial classes for them, and it be kind of a variant of, not even a variant. It wouldn't, I think, I don't know, we'll have to look at it and develop it. That's one of the things we're going to have to, one of the bridges we'll have to cross. But because their race is this little cuttlefish about this big, they can't do a lot of the things that one would need to be expected to do. But they're highly intelligent, and their interfaces with these suits are very, very complex. So we might just have the race have its own generic class, and that's what you would kind of need to progress down. And then as you level up and things need to scale up for a player character as their power level increases, maybe they get new suits from Sakar, new V version. We're calling the different versions of the suits V1, 2, 3, stuff like that. Maybe new V suits would come out or something like that at different levels. That would give them new abilities or something. Or we'll make it to where that that humanoid type suit just makes you able to just be like everyone else in those other classes.
It could be interesting. I don't know if we'd want to let that much change on a whim, probably if you have good stories that exist. But the idea that you're, for a cuddle, when you choose a class, you're choosing a suit model. So the idea could theoretically be that later in the game, you can go, I think I'm going to swap out my warrior suit for a medic suit or whatever. So you could, in theory, change class in a way other races couldn't. but there would probably be some steps around that. Yeah.
Or maybe a massive gold cost or something to be able to
Sure.
do that. Or yeah, so there's definitely going to be some hurdles to jump over for this class. Definitely open to what people's thoughts are for that. Should it have its own thing, or should we just have the humanoid medium-sized suit just be able to go into all the classes like the other humanoids? Yeah, so still a lot to develop on that one, but that's what we got for Sakar. Next on the list is Shiva, which is the ice planet. So that has the elements of water and air. Is it my turn to go through a planet?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. All right, so Shiva. So this is going to be, the whole planet will be either water or ice. There's not really going to be any land masses. The land masses will be on the polar caps. So if you thought of like Antarctica on the north and south, and then the whole middle is just bodies of water, the whole planet would be very, very cold. And the races present on Shiva will be the Goliaths and the Minotaurs. And again, we probably have to rename all of these races to something not permission violating, but so planet poles, yeah. So on the ice caps is going to be the populaces of the Minotaurs, which where the landing places for the interplanetary travel would be. So the Minotaurs would be kind of the known Shiva race to off-worlders. So what we have so far is they're going to be extremely hostile to anyone outside of their people who come there outside of official guild purposes. So that's going to open up some interesting experiences if the PCs go to Shiva. It's going to need to be official guild business. If they go there for their own private things outside of that and get caught, they will be very, very aggressive. They don't like the outside influences and try to maintain distance from all the other planets as much as possible, which we'll get into in a minute here. The Goliaths tend to stick to the glaciers, these icebergs, and use them as giant boats, and they ride the ocean currents with their colonies on them. So we still need to figure out exactly the methods that the Goliaths are going to do. We kind of have two ideas of how to branch it out. But first, with the Minotaurs, so we're putting that they're very violent and vulgar, and they're going to have constant propaganda from their rulers to cause fear and disobedience. So there's never any questioning orders. It's very regimented. There'll be violent public displays and forceful demonstrations, which will keep doubtful Minotaurs from ever rebelling against the rulers. One of the main revenue sources is their producing of the ice fortresses for the Goliaths. So since they're there on the ice structures, onto these ice caps on either end. And we were talking about splitting the hemispheres of the planet to having a more traditional half, a way of life, and then the other half being a more trying to incorporate other worldviews and technologies from these other planets. So one half, so like the landing platform would be on the side that is open to it, and they are slowly trying to implement those changes, but the other half is going to be very against it and sticking to the traditional ways that they've had for millennia. They've developed extreme tolerances to the cold and can be exposed to harsh elements for extended periods of time with little issues. But they are extremely vulnerable to heat, so most will not travel off planet because they're miserable or too hot. So like a Minotaur going to Dragua, for instance, will be a very interesting thing for a PC. It would just be completely miserable. Um, they also carve sharp spikes into their hooves so they can grip on the ice. Has become a cultural norm so much so that even off-world traveling minotaurs will paint triangle spikes on their hooves to make it look like they're spiked, even though they wouldn't be. Um, Off-world minotaurs will also take great pride in headhunting dwarves, and their greatest pride is killing one with arm rings. So we'll develop that, but they'll kind of wear them on their horns. The dwarves seeing this would usually run in fear or attack in retaliation. So there'll be that racial dynamic of minotaurs and dwarves hating each other, which might be a lot of fun. Goliaths, so they used their iceberg fortresses to travel all the fishing routes on the planet, and they go down towards the equator where it is the warmest on the planet, and that's where the best fishing is. And we were thinking about having the half of the hemisphere that is more traditional, what were we saying that they used to pull? It was the turtle dragons, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
They use the turtle dragons to physically pull their icebergs, while the other half, the technology half, is going to be using some kind of future tech propulsionary system that they integrate into their ice fortress. So as they carve them out, they put in the spot for the engine and stuff like that. But because they can move much quicker, and the heat from the engines and all that stuff propelling it, it's going to melt those down much faster. So the way of life of the Goliaths is going to be very different depending on which side of the hemisphere they're from. And the tech Goliaths are going to be able to be much quicker at getting all the fishing done because they can move much faster, but they're having to go purchase more of these iceberg fortresses because the water melts them quicker and the engines melt them quicker, stuff like that. Let's see, and then we talked about implementing. We fleshed out a little bit of how the life is on the planet for as far as like we wanted some kind of like kraken. What was the other word that we were using? I didn't write this down. Leviathan.
Yeah.
Some kind of Leviathan creatures that reside in these oceans, and they essentially can eat entire ships. So the Goliaths have gotten used to spotting the signs, like birds flying around a certain area. These Leviathans are going to come up and kind of purge all the fish and stuff that they've eaten, and the birds will feed off of that. So when they see the circling birds, they know to avoid that. So if player characters come to this planet and they don't know about these things, they might go investigate that. Well, then they're going to get attacked by Leviathan, and it could be a pretty cool encounter. And then there's also going to be these floating kelp beds that kind of ride the currents that grow these kind of fruit on the top. And there's going to be some kind of sea life, maybe like walruses or something, that eat this fruit that's on there, and these kelp beds allow it to happen because they're kind of like a massive jellyfish organism, and they want to eat larger sea creatures. So the thought was kind of like some kind of like orca killer whale concept, which eat the walruses. So they grow the fruit to attract the walruses, which is the bait for the orca that they want to eat. So that'd be a kind of a cool cycle for that. Let's see what else. There's still a lot of work we need to do for Shiva. I'm not sure exactly what we're gonna do for the world lore. Man, the stream keeps dipping out. Sorry if frames are dropping, guys. So yeah, not much done for world lore yet, but we will eventually get there.
Real quick, it just occurred to me, and conveniently now we're recording. So if I want to remember a thing, I can go back and watch
Yes,
it.
yes.
It just occurred to me as you were talking about moving those icebergs around, just the fact that they're moving and just communicating over distances, just made sense to me. The idea that if they're shaping these iceberg things, there can be specifically made just like channels in the iceberg at the top that they can cover and uncover to just act as like a wind instrument, just to communicate over the waves to each other.
Oh, that's cool.
So they can do sound signals or like a war horn, probably music as well if they have some sort of actual engine to generate it.
Sure.
It just occurred to me. I was like, oh, hey, that's a thought that I can record for whether we use it or not later.
Oh, cool. I like it. And then we were talking about the traditional half. Because they use the turtle dragons, they can incorporate the massive scales or the shells from these turtles as they die or whatever. They will put them on as like armor defenses on their fortresses, which would be kind of cool. And then those turtle dragons could maybe eat the kelp beds as well, so that would give reason for them to maybe encounter the leviathans and that part of the ecosystem. But as far as more information on that, we still got a lot to develop with Shiva, but all right, so let's go to Solaris 8. I think Ben, you were up.
Yep. Okay, so Solaris 8 is the Terran home territory, represented by let's see, I believe it was Earth and Lightning, leading it to be called the it deals with magnetism. So it's the new home of the Terrans. They had a small planet that used to be their home, but a rogue mercenary took it upon himself to attack a freighter that was on its way back to Carvis 55.
Sakar. We changed it.
Yeah, sorry, it's Sakar. Yeah. From Dragua, with a large supply of precious materials and metals. This was not an authorized raid, but it didn't matter because the damage had already been done. Sakar sent their entire fleet and essentially like threatened mass destruction. And by happenstance, there was the solar flare incident that wiped out the Terran planet.
Mm-hmm.
Just completely destroyed it, and of course Sakar took credit for it. Parts, let's see. Yeah, there were no inhabitable planets nearby, so there were talks about at one point of terraforming the moon of a nearby planet to become their future home, but that process was and still is extremely expensive and would take a long time for the moon to become livable. So instead, they, for the time being, had created essentially a space station that most of them live on. The Terrans use meritocracy, vesting in the merits of their people. So achievements lead to promotions and enormous rewards. And because of this, corruption is extremely common. Backstabbery is afoot. The medals on their uniforms are more than just looking impressive, because their military take it very seriously. If two highly decorated officers are fighting over an issue, then one with an even slightly more, like one that has more decorations, even if it's just a slight difference, that person will always win out. There is a major power struggle for supremacy, and officers will take advantage whenever possible in hopes of getting ahead. We also had
I
discussed...
think we changed the moon to being one of the asteroids in the plasma belt, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Which might change, but yeah.
Yeah, who knows? It's all open right now. Um, yeah, so on that note, I know that we were discussing the plasma belt. A lot of Terrans had moved there, following around space whales. What? Uh, and they're essentially, I call them poop harvesters. They're shit shovelers, um, where they collect the plasma that these whales produce, which we haven't gone over specifics about what exactly the plasma is used in. We've discussed certain types of space travel, plasma weaponry, various forms of energy development. Haven't nailed anything down on that just yet.
Hmm.
But we figured out that a lot of the humans work in that industry. Um, it's Solaris 8 has
No, I'll be right back.
yeah, has this open free market that thrives on competition. It welcomes all people from anywhere in the system. The laws and regulations are few, but the few they do have are strictly enforced. So all crimes are met with capital punishment, no matter how big or small. If it's a law that they have and you break it, death penalty. Boom. Because of this, crime is avoided at all costs, um, and seems to provide a unique planet system with a very weird sense of peace. Um, did we ever land on the policing force? How that was going to play out?
We were saying that there was going to be the maximum security prison for the
Hmm.
worst criminals. Since I don't know if you covered this when I was gone, but that was going to be in the plasma area, and because they're so militaristic and very good at policing and all that stuff, they were going to be in charge of being like the warden and guards for that max security prison, and it was kind of put in the plasma area because that's kind of where all the shit is. and then we're gonna have to have some kind of relationship between the Terrans, humans, whatever we call them, and the male gnomes because they're going to be going to the prison to do their experiments on the prisoners, which nobody cares about.
Now we had discussed that concept, but I thought it's while the prisoners wouldn't. It wasn't the gnomes going to the prison. The prisoners were being transported from the prison secretly
To
to
Iria?
whatever. Well, not to Iria, to whatever facility the male gnomes had set up.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
I think we discussed them being in system on the plasma thing, which we'll get more to the plasma thing. But essentially, that was the origin of like the Junker towns. Was the people who
Yep.
survived
That's right.
the
Okay.
experiments.
Okay.
Still have quite a bit to flesh out on Solaris 8. We've touched on a little bit of this.
Uh,
I think this is one of the planets that's gone through the most changes. One of the territories that's gone through the most changes, really.
mm-hmm.
For the simple fact that originally it was and
We're lagging.
then we decided on space station. Um, I love the idea of like magnet-based monorail systems that just go around the station.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and
Oh, we
then
talked
of
about
course,
multi-ring systems for that
yeah,
too.
yeah,
Armillary
the
sphere.
armillary sphere concept about how yeah, it's shown disconnected on my screen.
Oh,
It's back.
and we are
It's
back.
back.
Sorry, lots of technical
And we're
difficulties. Yeah, we're back. I don't know what's going on. We stream all the time, never have problems. Of course, we start off a new project, and of course, technical issues. Sorry, we're back on. Solaris 8, what we're talking about? Oh, the rings.
Yeah, we had talked about kind of they built from the inside out, and the station's now built, and they're trying to terraform a planet to live on again.
Mm-hmm.
With the idea that the internal rings, the most critical, because they can be the most protected. So like power, water, and food are all internal, and that's part of what led to the like you broke a rule dead because we don't have extra resources and room to survive.
The
so
capital punishment for all crimes.
Done.
Right.
Yeah, which harkens me back to the 100, and I love that concept.
Right, exactly.
Like,
on the arc.
you stole medicine, float them.
Exactly. And then there was talks about having, because we still got to figure out how everyone's going to get from planet to planet. We don't know exactly how we're going to do that. Is it going to be faster than light travel? Is it going to be wormholes? Is it going to be magic? Still got to figure that out. What was that? What was that alien movie with Matthew McConaughey? No, with Matthew McConaughey and
Interstellar?
No, it was an older one. That alien contact, and they sent them instructions to build this thing of all these rings, and they dropped Contact. So
oh yeah,
I don't know if that's maybe a good idea because it's the magnet planet or area. Maybe having some kind of method of using the star base to launch people through wormhole, or like using like
that could be interesting.
Kind of like
base of the
like a railgun kind of thing, where like they use the magnetism or something to get someone super far. I don't know if we want to have multiple ways of going planet to planet. Maybe people have to come to this base to go to the other planets. Maybe
at one point that each like quadrant tied, well, quadrant applies for each sector tied to the elements had like a gate. So we've tossed around a few ideas and we'll nail it down.
But Solaris 8 is also the base of the Ventus Guild, which has to do with the transportation, right?
Yeah.
So if that would fit if we made this star base kind of the central hub for getting to all the other planets, because the Transit Guild is there. So there's
that could be interesting.
A possible good connection.
Yeah, if they're central, so to speak, just spaced out with everyone else. The idea that you use magic, faster than light, or whatever, to in a limited capacity to get there, and then whoop,
right. So if you're at Solaris 8, you can get to the other places quickly, maybe, and then you have to use other methods.
To
Go ahead.
The Mass Effect concept of the Mass Effect engines. You can travel around in your area, but you got to hit that thing to get launched.
Right, the fast travel aspects. And we got to figure out how far away all these planets are from each other, what the systems are, because you also got the in-game travel time that we got to consider as well.
Which I'd love, like with the in-game travel stuff. I would love to see a system that expands on exploration as well, because it seems like in a lot of tabletops that I've seen and read through, they kind of touch on it, but a lot of them don't really do a decent enough job of like exploration, coming up with new things, like walking from one spot to another type situation, and like, what do I run into? They just have random encounter tables. Boom, there's an ogre.
Yeah, we could have... Yeah, come up with something. Yeah, that'd be really cool. And depending on the way that you travel, could have different random encounters or something like that. We are also talking about having... because it's a little bit of a space opera feel of it, too. Also having, like... combat from like a starship side as well, so it's not just player combat, it's also their ship, so they could be upgrading, customizing their ship to get different technologies or weapons or arrays and different things like that, and they could have run-ins with other mercenaries or bounty hunters or
Space creatures
exactly.
or whatever else gets incorporated.
So some cool stuff. Oh, side note, with space, we had talked about changing up how space is from our space where it's inhabitable, talking about if we made space in this system not be deadly, where a person could essentially be in space and survive. Like there's breathable atmosphere everywhere in space. We're not 100% on it, but I think it'd be really cool. There's other movies and things that have implemented this kind of idea, which could give, like if you get ejected from a spaceship or something, or there's a whole breach and everyone's out, they don't instantly just die from exposure to space. You don't have to have necessarily a suit on, but there's still the lack of gravity. You don't have any supplies probably, so you would die. And everything is so far apart, you couldn't just push off of something and just float, because it would take way longer than your lifetime to just float to somewhere. But that might open up some...
definitely floating through space. Like, what are the odds that another spaceship's just gonna happen to be in your path?
Right, in infinite space. Yeah, exactly. But that could open up some really cool things of one ship is next to another ship, and they're over radio communication trying to negotiate something. The players could kind of sneak out of the ship and kind of push off and land on the other one and do some kind of infiltration mission or something. Obviously, you couldn't just, as a body, go into a planet by yourself. You would need some kind of ship to do that because of the atmosphere. You'd burn up and stuff. But a lot of cool ideas that we're running with that. If you don't have... Let's read the chat real quick. Yep, takes coin. And we can... excuse me. We could tie it into the guilds as well, with the guilds being a very powerful presence in the system. They're well funded. They seek out these elemental affinity people to become adventurers that work for the guilds, and if the ships themselves belong to the guilds, they would have to work for them. It wouldn't necessarily be theirs, but then if they did enough work and saved up coin, they could maybe somehow get their own ship to work outside of the guilds. But it would need to start with the guilds or something. So we'll figure out the whole system for that as well. Alright, so now we are transitioning to the world of Truinus, the wood planet, which has the affinities of water and earth. We talked about it a little bit when we discussed Avalon, but who's up for talking about the next world? I lost track.
In theory, me, but I actually have a lot more for Zed than I do Truinus. So I can either do Zed now and then transition to you for Truinus, or if you want to do Truinus, then I'll hop on Zed.
Sure, I can do Truinus, yeah, that's fine. Alright, so Truinus. As of right now, the races present on this planet is like a lizard folk type people, and then the Coleoptera, which are like a massive beetle type people. And it's going to be the base of the Aquas Guild here, so the book would kind of be, the water book would be centralized, starting with this planet. So Truinus cultivates a rare plant that they harvest and turn into medicine that they sell to Avalon. Their entire world's income is based on this trade deal to Avalon, which can't grow the plants. After the plague 200 years ago, again the time frames might flex, but they began massive farms to grow this plant from the rising demand, eventually turning their entire planet into one massive farm growing this on this planet. So it's like a big monocrop. Because they've converted their entire planet to producing this plant, they must sell the medicine it provides to Avalon for very high prices and life supplies, making them 100% on Avalon for survival. And we talked about this a little bit, but the truth is, however, that Truinus is the plague that they got and brought to Avalon. They cured it with this medicine. When they heard Avalon getting it as well, they refined it to a highly addictive to have highly addictive properties, so they would want to buy more from them even after they were cured. The entire planet voted and decided to withhold telling Avalon that they were cured from the first dose and began taking advantage of the other planet's addiction. After 200 years, a lie has been told for so long that many forget about it, making only the leadership of True Witness still behind the plot. This might change, but that's what we have as the moment. True Witness is set up to all the planet's citizens have equal positions of authority. No one is superior to another, and it is their worldview that it is everyone's duty to vote, and they take great pride in doing so. In fact, they vote on everything. They base everything on majority rules concept. So even if someone's viewpoint ends up on the minority side, they trust the power of public opinion, concede without question to the majority. I was thinking, like, we could kind of base this on the real world side of social media. How some people get so sucked into the approval of others and public opinion, and like the clicking the like button, that kind of thing, like upvote me, so the popularity thing would be very strong on that planet, and what people publicly think of you holds a lot of sway. On the Orville, the show, they had an episode that kind of touched on this concept, and I think it was where all of the inhabitants on one of those alien planets had this badge, and people could upvote or downvote somebody, like if they liked them. So if somebody did something nice, or you had a good interaction, you could just upvote on their badge, and so they would hold like a popularity score. And if you got too many downvotes, because public opinion is so strong, you became a criminal essentially, and they would persecute you and hold you. You have to go to court to justify why you're such a shitbag, and you pretty much, the evidence is against you. And we wouldn't want to rip it off directly, but I think this is a fantastic concept that I think would be really cool to implement in a different way. But having that public opinion and the dislike kind of thing be really cool. And if everybody has an equal vote, I think that ties into it really well. We haven't gone too far into that. What do you guys think of that concept? We don't have to implement it, but
it's a very cool concept. The idea of just the supreme kind of inherent equality they all have for one another, and just the idea that whether you do a legit vote on individuals the way Orville did it, or just reputation is everything.
Sure.
Thing. So even if it's just word of mouth or however we do it, but the idea that it's very not good. Like, being unpopular is whatever. Here, you don't have to be popular, but some people would view that very negatively. But the idea that that's ingrained into society,
mm-hmm.
especially because it's going to make for some cool outcast NPCs.
Mm-hmm.
Like the guy who just embraces it, like, being popular is lame. Just trying to dove head first into it when he got too unpopular. Like,
sure,
this is me. I'm gonna live it.
And on the Orville, one of their officers that went onto the planet, he was dancing up on this statue, just joking around, being perverted. But they had videotaped it, and it hit the news, and everybody publicly were just downvoting this dude because they all got badges when they got there, whatever. And so it just it became viral. Everything's viral on that planet, public opinion. And he had, I'm going off on a tangent, I'll wrap this up, but essentially it went viral, so he got all these negative votes, and he had to go to trial to not die. So it might be a cool thing for the PCs to have to deal with. And I think they end up hacking into the social media network of the planet, because we're way more advanced, and they could fudge the numbers or something. I don't remember exactly, but it was a pretty cool thing. I
love the concept of someone being brought before a judge going, "Why are you such an asshole?"
Right, and if it's publicly televised,
Well, the person's just like, I've been hanging out with a lot of dwarves, and the magistrate's just like, yeah, okay, that's fine. Yeah, excusable.
So that might be kind of a fun thing of like this tribunal of Coloptera or the lizard folk people are grilling them of why they came to their planet and caused all these problems or something. So might be kind of fun. But yeah, so there's the symbiotic relationship between Tyrannus and Avalon. We still haven't come up with any of the world history for it, but that will come. All right, so next is Zed, which, Joe, you said you were wanting to spearhead, so take it away.
Yeah, no, this was when we realized the original idea for Zed is this crystal world where kind of the inhabitants can kind of shape the world around them. They have a connection to the planet itself, and periodically everything's redistributed and reshaped. But that concept led to crystal not leaving the planet, and we eventually came to some ideas on how crystals can be used to power spaceships, kind of give spaceships their own atmosphere, and a bunch of cool ideas. So we kind of had to rework this. So this has been my project for some time.
Yes, and I don't think I've heard this yet, so I'm
No,
excited
this is
to hear.
all new.
Yeah.
This is all new, so we might get some feedback and maybe change things.
This just in, developments on Zed. We go live to Joe on the field.
I'm looking at my notes. I'm like, God, Ben wrote it all out like a story. I'm thinking bullet points. That's what I've got. But,
You're good.
The race inherent on Zed are the shard mines, so they're kind of crystalline people. They live and breathe crystal, so they kind of can manipulate it. Is what we originally talked about, and I'm keeping that to an extent.
Mm-hmm.
But my thought,
real quick, I was thinking about what if we changed the race name to Zed as well? Zed or from Zed?
I like that
because they're crystals from a crystal planet.
It works really well with what I had thought of for the origin of the shard mines. But
perfect. Okay, keep going.
I like that calling those Zeds. So yes, we kind of had to think of how all these planets could sustain other life on some level, so we didn't have to worry about too many places where you can't go here without a virus suit. So I'm picturing kind of a garden world. There's earth, there's vegetation, there's water, there's air. Some organic life has developed, not sentient, but like small creatures and deer and things like that. But just erupting out of the earth at points are just these crystalline spires, and like the actual stone beneath the actual usable, tillable earth is all this crystal. And so my thought was that shard mines, now called Zed, I'm digging in a lot, are not a creature that organically like breeds and reproduces. A shard mine is a naturally occurring phenomenon. So a Zed, the reason I like it so much is that there are going to be places around the planet, just these kind of crystalline caves, and there are certain areas where the light is refracted in the right way so that it will kind of hit a stalactite or stalagmite for a long enough period that the focused energy kind of grants sentience to kind of this hunk of pre-existing crystal. So they come into being. Doesn't happen often. So when kind of a new Zed emerged from the cave, it's just kind of this huge event. They make a really big deal out of it. It's celebrated and exciting.
Happy birthday!
Exactly. So they aren't like not numerous. There's enough of them, but they don't necessarily age the way other people do. Eventually, the crystal breaks down and is kind of returned to the planet to kind of reuse the material, but they just kind of last a long time. So they, and I was thinking to give them kind of a shard, a now Zed flavor for the player to use, is the idea that they each have their own like personal hunk of crystal infused with some of the same energy that gives them sentience, that they can manipulate that the way we originally talked about them in the planet. So just the idea that they have this hunk, so they're like, okay, I can turn this into a crowbar or a shield or within a certain defined limitation of material.
So what you're saying is like when they're born, they also like, do they just like take a piece of this like with them? Is it
Yes
like
and no.
part of them?
It is not part of them. They go back to their originating cave upon whatever we decide is their coming of age. So then they go get a crystal something. They'll have a significant name for it that I don't know with. But
Okay.
it's their own personal chunk. Actually, maybe we'll call that the shard, since they're no longer shards. There's that. So they go get their own shard that they can use, and it's something that's just kind of like this, on par with like a holy personal artifact that's just for them. And so they kind of are of the planet, so it led to that symbiotic relationship of the planet creates new Zed, the Zed take care of the planet, and the kind of idea with like pollen and bees, there's just kind of this inherent, I mean, now there are more established cities, but originally kind of this nomadic wandering sense to the Zed, because they would just kind of want to, as they continue to like grow more crystal, which happens very slowly, as it does anywhere, but they want to kind of acquire it from multiple places. So some of the older Zed would be more colorful.
Okay.
More multicolored, as they kind of have more material from different places that has kind of grown into their something. So in some ways, if you knew Zed, you could kind of like map out where they'd spend time.
That'd be funny if they just name everything Zed. They just refer to things as Zed, you know. They just love the word.
It's like a placeholder word for them, kind of like us and
But with them, it's like the
It's
enunciation or the, you know, like to them, there's 300 different Zeds. But for everyone else, they just hear Zed and they're like, I don't understand what you're talking about. That'd be funny.
And I had a thought, we'll probably want to keep it more humanoid. I wrote down the question mark, the idea that kind of Zed physically develop differently. I mean, everyone does, but the idea that they might, or their physical being might adapt over time if they've got a certain task that they do, that's their job, they might physically adapt to it in time, just to the way the crystal is malleable.
What if they have a crystalline type structure to their being, what if they started to conform to their elemental affinity?
Ooh.
So say someone starts in lightning, they'll have a yellowish tint, but then if they dip into, you know, fire, then they would start to turn orange or something like that. So you can kind of tell what type of Zed they are by their color. So maybe the people of the planet are yellow or brown. Just a thought. Cool. And then based on their experiences, the off-world ones could be different colors, so they would be like, you know, unique to the on-world ones.
You could tell which Zeds have traveled. I had kind of written down that industry similar to the Cuddle. The Cuddle had a jump start. They relatively, probably not on the same level as Color, but industry kind of advanced. I'm picturing them as one of the final people to be made contact with.
Okay.
And kind of essentially like, oh, hey, welcome. Yeah, we're super helpful with everybody. Oh, you've got that flying thing? Well, I think our crystals could work on that. And that's kind of led to the explosion of travel.
Oh, okay.
So, because clearly before some of this explosion of travel, people were going around on some level, but I think this is where it took off. And so they've got kind of, they're on some level more nomadic. They'll travel between them, but they've got these massive crystal cities spread around the planet. So it's just like the picture, kind of like the beautiful utopian future cities you think of, just all the buildings made of crystal, all of it powered by just sunlight focused via crystals, similar to the way the Zed are born. But
looks like Ben wants to jump in.
Oh, just real quick. When you were mentioning the crystals and like, oh, maybe this will work in your ship, it just totally brought on some Atlantis vibes for me. Where they stick a little crystal key in there.
Oh, right.
Absolutely.
Now I'm imagining tech like that as part of the Zed stuff.
That would be kind of cool.
Very well could be. Instead of like an on-off switch, you just input.
It's just like a universal USB plug. Like it'll just work with anything.
Yeah.
Zed crystals just powers anything.
Especially if each Zed has their own shard, they just kind of shape it to the right input.
Yep.
And there you go.
Because it's just energy. They're reverting energy, so it's like, boop.
Yeah, because originally we were talking about the ability to change energy into matter was the original concept, or matter back into energy, and that would be the shard mine's whole thing is being able to do that, and the planet is where all of that energy comes from, and then the native people use that energy to shape it into matter to whatever they're wanting, and then the planet had to have a redistribution cycle where they had to return it back. We've went away from that, but yeah, we could have some kind of element, yeah.
So yeah, having the shard kept them off planet and still having an element of that, so the player could feel that. And I kind of made it more difficult in my head, so that like cities where there was a construction time, groups of Zed had to work together to construct these buildings. So it's doable, but it's crystal. The idea of the crystal is already physical energy, and so it's moldable and shapeable, but it takes a lot of willpower and time.
Sure, you would need large groups of Zed to make Zed buildings. So it's only practical on their planet.
Yes.
You could theoretically go put a Zed temple on, say, Truinus, but you'd have to have so many Zed go do that when all the things that they need is already on their planet.
Yeah, and it would take them years to shape.
Yeah.
Right.
And it hadn't occurred to me the idea to do that until just now, but in my head, because I was just saying the crystal in my mind was like a physical representation of energy. You could take that crystal, build a building, but as soon as you drained the energy, it's done. You can't shape that anymore. So the crystal can die off-world, is what I was just thinking. But
its power's finite off-planet.
Yeah. So the idea, though the shard would probably be symbiotic with the actual Zed who uses it, just for the player's sake. But we talked about them being kind of socialist, everybody benefits. I had worked that in, because it's such a rarity that new ones show up, they never really had an overpopulation issue. Resources were fine for everybody. So there's no huge reason to go to war with one another.
Sure.
So they just kind of made laws
very
that benefited
passive,
people.
peaceful.
And because it was such an efficient form of government without the kind of waste, it kind of led to as they integrated with society, they're like, okay, this is a perfect place for the legislative guild. It kind of showed a lot of diplomacy, and people come here to kind of see the ways other cultures develop laws.
And if they were a very candor race, I think that would help too with the legislative guild. You know what I mean? Like, just let's put it in a place where people just don't lie. Not that they couldn't, but it could just be a racial thing that they just speak truth.
No,
yeah, because I mean, they've been alive for so long. Because, like you said, like eventually, their bodies break down, but definitely not at the rate of human. So since they live so long, it would make sense that a lot of them are very legislative, because like they'd be able to remember back 200 years, whereas other races only live like 80.
That and because Zed are of the planet, we're all the same. We all come from the same caves. So it's just kind of inherently built that you're crystal on crystal or standing on crystal.
Kyle was saying that Zed sound more evolved than other planets, almost citing one of the first races or peoples in the galaxy. That's a cool point.
Yeah, they might be much older, but new to the idea of space travel is a very cool idea.
Evolved past motions and jealousy and evil intentions. Ooh, that's kind of cool. Maybe they could think they are like the origin of life, even. Maybe.
Oh. They could also just kind of look a little bit, not necessarily down, but just kind of be confused at the inefficiency of flesh.
Sure. Almost be like a AI kind of approach to things. Just facts, logic, and they see all the fallacies in humanity, all the other kinds, the races, and maybe them going off planet would be maybe on the understanding all the other life, these inferior forms that are super flawed. That might be kind of cool.
And it builds into the inherent idea of growing crystal from somewhere else, so that built-in just primal symbiosis. There are new places to go, and things to experience to acquire. But
that's pretty cool.
There.
I think it'd be funny if we called the shard Zed. I mean, we can call it whatever we want, but that's just funny. Like, the planet's Zed, the people are Zed, and then the Zed get a Zed later. And it'd just be so confusing, but to them it just makes sense. And then, like, Zed could also just mean, like, truth. They always speak Zed. You know, so people who lie, they're not speaking Zed. You know, like...
Literally, the like, they call anything Zed that is important to them.
Exactly. That'd be so
So
great,
their family, Zed.
Yeah.
Their friends, Zed. This is my Zed.
Oh, okay. Nice to meet you. What's your name? Zed? What?
What?
Where are you from, Zed? What's that shard you're holding, Zed? We don't have to do it. I think it'd be pretty funny.
I think it's fun. We should, on some level at least, have a lot of things called Zed. Okay, there we go. As the kind of interplanetary community was introduced to them, and they found space travel and realized the crystals could be used on that level for the spaceships, it kind of brought a lot of prosperity to the planet, which is great, and let them pretty easily integrate into the kind of intergalactic community. But this started leading to problems because I was thinking on your original idea, the guy who kind of hijacked the redistribution thing. So I'm kind of turning that on its head a little bit. So up until Zed started leaving planet and they started selling crystal to be used in space fair, eventually any and all crystal that came out of the caves went back to the caves. The planet was constantly kind of recycling itself.
We don't have any hive mind type races, and I don't want to go completely like Borg, but what if not necessarily a telepathic connection between them? I don't think it'd be good to have them being able to talk to any of the other Zed. But what if Zed, another Zed word, could just be they know where Zed are, and they use this because, say, off-world Zed die or get lost, they go find that Zed to bring it back to Zed, so the Zed can go back into Zed for more Zed. You get what I'm saying? Like, not
I follow. Yeah.
Yeah, like Zed needs to stay with Zed. So if they had some kind of loose connection to know where they all are.
Well, probably not where they all are while they're alive, but perhaps when one dies and it's a certain distance, so like if you're within a certain range of the death, those Zed around it, like they sense that, and then they like immediately beeline.
Zed can sense dead Zed, so they can return it to Zed. Maybe the worldview
is a certain distance. You're aware of the number of Zed around you and their location, but anyone who goes off world leaves very detailed records for that reason.
Okay.
And so you can kind of know who's around. You can probably tell individuals with this sense and maybe limited emotions. The reason I'm thinking of it is the second you said that, I was like, well, obviously it's called the resonance. Like idea of resonant frequency of materials. Yeah. So just the resonance is how they are aware of each other. They can't
Off-worlders could call it resonance, but the Zed will call it Zed.
Well, clearly, it's the Zed.
We got like a Zed dictionary.
I love the concept that them calling things the Zed, pointing back to what Joe was talking about, is like that's their sense of truth. Like, this is my truth. This is my truth. This is my truth.
My Zed. Yeah, and they definitely will make a point of getting back any Zed that have died off-world. But because they're selling crystal to ships, it's been kind of slowly decreasing the speed of new Zed being created as materials lost from the planet.
Okay.
And like cities and constructs are taking longer to be built. At first, it's very gradual because it's a big planet and only so much Zed is being put into spaceships. But I was thinking, because one of the books is probably going to deal more with the Legislative Guild, since it's based there. So I was thinking the other one to tie back into the redistribution. And some of this I literally put together in the first half of the stream. Because I was looking at my notes, I was like, I really need to name this person that I've did with thing. And I thought of a name of another thing. So,
Des. So, Zed backwards. No, kidding. Just kidding.
In this, in the book that deals with, doesn't deal with the guild, that deals more with like the Zed and the problems on Zed. Some of the eldest Zed have kind of been going away, disappearing. They go, we don't know why. Maybe they're on some journey, but they'll just kind of go without notice. Um, and I had thought of this earlier because it's the same kind of energy being poured into new Zed as they're created. The idea of reincarnation for Zed. So, kind of, because we had originally talked about the kind of like a feudalism-esque thing on top of the socialism. And so it's not necessarily an outright power, but the oldest Zed, the ones who have lived the most lives, kind of have the strongest connection to the Zed, can build the fastest, and have the most influence. And they don't fully remember their past lives, but they might just kind of know some things they never really had a reason to learn, or they might be good at a skill immediately, kind of a prodigy style thing, rather than having to practice it. So sometimes there'll be aspects of their past lives. But there is a kind of legendary figure, like a Paul Bunyan type of thing, where it's just kind of myth and folklore. But the original Zed, Prime.
Zed Prime could be his name. Nice.
I just called him Prime, but Zed Prime is even better, honestly, as soon as you said it.
But these past memories and stuff, I love the idea of just calling them echoes.
Oh.
That's, wow.
I like that a lot. So, most Zed can get glimpses and pieces of their echoes, kind of like if you looked through a crystal, there'd just be facets of light in there.
Sure. Kind of like reflections, maybe stuff is backwards. Exactly. So like their echoes could be disoriented, not actually. Yeah.
There's probably some Zed who spend their whole lives just trying to figure out their echoes and things, and echoes of others. But Zed Prime has occasionally resurfaced, and Zed Prime's the only one who's ever remembered each echo.
Oh.
So he has the accumulated knowledge of their very long lifetimes. But they don't necessarily, as soon as you die, you're coming back as a new Zed.
Maybe there was like a specific thing that only Zed Prime could know.
Well, this is it.
He's already got it.
Oh, okay.
I straight up do. He's come back periodically, and then it's been a big deal, but it's always been so long that it kind of fades back in the myth. So the kind of eldest, more powerful Zed that have been disappearing, whether I put a couple options like a remote site in the mountains or a hidden valley or a cave system. I kind of like the planet's core, like, I can't remember the name of the movie, but they're going to go on a seventh planet with dinosaurs and shit. But Zed Prime has been kind of taking the eldest Zed and bringing them to this location because the most recent time he came back, he remembers Zed as Zed originally was, and it's clearly weaker. And so he's bringing all these eldest Zed together to heal the planet.
That could be part of the Earth book portion, is Zed Prime doing that whole thing. And then I was thinking,
he's in direct conflict with the guild.
Sure, that's cool.
Guilds, because they want crystal-powered spaceships, and many Zed want that too. I'm picturing the Rick and Morty episode where they're mining Pluto, and just the base population doesn't realize it's killing the planet. So they're trying to. We've got Zed Prime, who is a villain. He's kidnapping powerful Zed and whisking them away, and there's a whole trail of mystery to find. And then Zed Prime is actually, no, I'm not a villain. There's our planet's dying.
Sure. So that's cool. And then maybe like with the Lightning book that touches on Zed, that could be on the acquiring the Zed that are off world and bringing them back, because the Lightning book touches Solaris 8 and the Plasma, which has the prison. So maybe there's a Zed that's at the prison that died or something along the line. So the players, the arc would be, they gotta, while on Zed they learn about the thing, they gotta go to Solaris 8 to get clearance to go to the prison, which is over in the Plasma area. You know what I mean? Like, it could kind of go to where eventually they get that Zed and bring it back to Zed.
Now, tying that into Althea with, what if Zed Prime is, essentially kidnapping these older ones, and he's hiding them within the storms on Althea. because the electromagnetics would interfere with their ability to sense frequencies, which is how they're going missing.
That's very cool. So instead of maybe like sitting in the planet's core directly trying to willpower shard mind well, Zed, instead of trying to Zed the Zed directly, taking them to Athea where they've got these massive atmosphere influencing machines and studying that technology, trying to find a way to kind of build their own focuses for the solar energy that provides sentience to the planet.
What if this technology thing that we still haven't figured out that Althea uses, what if it's a chunk of the Zed planet?
Maybe that's the focusing thing.
Yeah.
That's what allows it to focus.
Yeah. And then maybe he gives part of it or tells the orc guy from Avalon, maybe he goes to Zed to break, he steals part of the planet maybe. Or buys it. I don't think they would sell it. They wouldn't really have any. Maybe he like goes there, tries to get it, steals it.
Hold on, that ties in because look at Avalon. Remember we were discussing about what might have caused the issue with the original tech that was borrowed from Althea. What caused it to funnel the flames down instead of producing an atmospheric shield of some sort. What if it's because of the fact that even the Athenians that are alive nowadays, those elves that are alive nowadays, don't know that what is powering their atmospheric thing is that piece of crystal. And maybe the orcs of Avalon didn't have that crystal because they didn't know that that's what was powering it. Maybe that's why it backfired the way it did.
Yeah, they had to make their own power source.
Oh, so they got the tech, but not the crystal.
Mm-hmm.
Well, either way, I very much like the idea that just at some point in the past, asteroid strike or something blew a chunk of Zed onto Althea.
Sure.
Which could be interesting, is if we're talking about how the crystal doesn't recharge off planet, they could have a timer on their atmosphere and technology they don't know about.
Ah, and that could be addressed in the Lightning Book. Very cool.
Yeah, because that also plays into the fact that if it's addressed in the Lightning Book, then you have possible conflict that perhaps the atmospheric control, whatever it is faltering because it's running out of energy, which then allows the elves on the storm side of the planet to raid closer and closer to the capital.
Oh. Awesome. Good stuff.
See, anybody watching this down the line, how could you not want to be developing with us right now? So much cool just happened. And it all started because someone said we should call the Zed Zed. And just spiraled into awesome.
That's been the last 3 months of our lives. Awesome, good stuff. All right, so this developing stuff is fantastic, but we're trying to lore dump for episode 1 to get everybody caught up. So we'll put a pin in this. Great stuff. I'm glad we talked about it, but we got to touch on a little bit of everything else so we can call the lore dump done, and then we can have episodes coming. All right, so next is going to be the plasma belt, or whatever we end up calling it, asteroid belt. That's plasma-y. Whose turn we're on? We're on Ben, right?
Yeah, swap places.
Trying to find any notes on that.
I have to just go from memory. So the plasma.
My memory is terrible.
Sure. The lightning and fire are the elemental affinities for it. We put the Fulgus Guild will be based there, which is the militant. So it could be like a strategic outpost. And we talked about. You can just jump in whenever. I'll just start going with it. So there's the maximum security prison on an asteroid that we're talking about, ran by the Terran. The no males do experiments on inmates to R&D their body augmentation technology. This is going to be kind of like the Fallout area where the Terran homeworld was after the supernova. So it's in that sector of space, all that stuff. So there's going to be a lot of nebula, plasma, whatever. And we were saying that the plasma is going to be the fuel for the starships, tentatively. And there could be two ways that civilization harvests this plasma to use for energy. One of them would be a more natural process, and then one would be kind of a manufactured route. And the manufacturing part could be part of the labor camp of the max security prison, maybe. But it'd be very crude. And then we talked about the space whales that we're wanting. And if we have space be habitable, making these creatures these massive, like blue whale, humpback whale looking things that are obviously fantasy sci-fi influence for looks. They could fly through this space, and people use them to harvest this plasma. So they could just, open their mouths and swallow these big clouds of this plasma, and they can stomach it and bring it back to wherever, I don't know where. And then the whales essentially eat it or something, and they excrete the refined version of it, and that could be the super powerful energy source. And then there's the crude stuff that's refined or processed on the prison.
Yeah.
Let's see.
We'll talk about the whales kind of being a joint thing, because the militant guild is present in the system to guard it all, and then the transit guild connected to the light book is in charge. They have the corporations that do most of the kind of following around the whales, making sure they're healthy, collecting, be very valuable for space fuel. And then the kind of fallout town, the prisoners that live through their experiments with the gnomes are usually just left there, because the gnomes go, okay, cool, that works, and then they're back to their thing. So there's a bunch of misshapen, broken creatures of all types kind of living in asteroid belts. So whether it's one big asteroid that has a city, or like a sprawling series of asteroids, we haven't talked about it. Which, actually, I think about it, it might be interesting if that's where the Zed is that died, just this kind of dude who just made shit for people, who was very successful in Junkertown.
Oh, okay.
But, kind of this Wild West Fallout society where it's just kind of, we shouldn't be alive here, but here we are.
Cowboys, scrappers, junkers, con artists.
Talk about the idea that a lot of people will risk, kind of like with a jetpack and a dream, just trying to catch a little bit of that sweet, sweet whale goo.
Where they live hard and die young.
Make some black market fuel. And then the prison being run by the Fulgus Guild for everybody else. I feel like I had another thought there.
Awesome.
Oh, that's what it was. I had thought, technically it's not the manga area, but it occurred to me that they might have most of that prison in zero gravity, especially because they're in a drift in space. Guards get gravity. Prisoners are left to let their muscles kind of wither because they're just floating all the time. And whether or not we want to influence magnet directly in plasma, I think it would be neat if they just had like threads of metal woven into the uniform, so they could just hit a button, magnetize a wall, and swoop.
For control,
are all kinda,
population control. That's kind of cool, actually. Cool. All right, so we touched base on a little bit of the guilds, how the books will be structured. We talked a little bit about the magical elements and their affinities and how they're distributed between the planets. We went through a little bit of the backstory, a little bit of the world lore. Obviously, a lot of stuff still left to develop. We brushed on the races, which planets, who comes from where. Obviously, a lot more stuff needs to be fleshed out with that. We're at 3 hours. You guys want to keep going, or do you want to call it good for an episode? We could go through classes, but honestly, that stuff's got to be developed, so that would be okay for that to be a develop episode as well, or we can lore dump it what we got now. Cool with either way.
Yeah, I think that definitely needs more development because we were talking about incorporating elemental aspects into those
right?
as separate things. So that definitely needs more development.
Okay. And then game mechanics still like so much to do on it, but um, so with the character creation process that players would go through, they would pick their race, which would dictate which planet they're from, which will give them the two elemental affinities that they could pick from, which will modify their classes, and then they could pick from the classes, which we'll go into next time. Um, and they'll have kind of subclasses within that. um, we were talking about how attributes will work. It's obviously all these figures will change based on the actual system that we use, but coming up with the primary stats, um, we were talking about the 6 attributes that are traditional for new TTRPGs: the strength, dex, con, wisdom, intelligence, charisma. Um, all of those combine, just kind of like we're wanting everything to be kind of thematic. We have 5s for everything. We got, like water and lightning makes storm. So we're thinking about applying that to how the rest of your stats would go for your character, and these 6 attributes would each have a pair that would tell you what the other stat would be. So, for instance, strength and dexterity would give you speed. Your wisdom and con would be your will. Um, your perception would be your strength and your wisdom. You know what I mean? So we have kind of a spreadsheet of what we were thinking about. So, say for instance, you had a 5 and a 7, that would then be a 12. So I don't know what that means for modifiers, whether you get a 12 or the 12 means a 2, or I don't know. But we were really liking how all of your skills, ability, all those things are tied to 2 attributes instead of just one, because it doesn't always make sense to have some skills and things that you could do only be just one thing. A lot of things are kind of, this is a primary and this is a secondary, or 2 things equally. So we have a little bit of a spreadsheet with that, which we can get into later. We also talked about, we like the idea of having multiple levels of proficiencies. So instead of just you're either proficient or you're not, and maybe some classes can expertise, we liked the idea of having 5, where one of them is kind of a neutral, inept, incompetent, but then you can go up to proficient and expert. So applying that 5 level of expertise or proficiencies into things. Not sure what the number values will be yet, but we really like that concept. And social side. We can go over the alignment concept that we had as well, real quick. Character alignment. So again, this is subject to change, but one of the things that I don't like about some of the game systems out there, when you're trying to figure out who your character is and what makes them different than everyone else, using 5e for example, they dumbed a lot of things down to make it easier to learn, which is great for new people. But if you've been playing for a while, it's a little too watered down. So when we were looking at the intention of this system, we want to use a lot of the good stuff that's been streamlined in newer systems, but still have some of the more fleshed out things of some of the older systems. So kind of having a happy marriage between the two, of not too much to learn, but there's already systems for new players. Not that new players couldn't learn this system, but this is going to be more geared towards people who already know how to play TTRPGs. This is a new, different way to be able to play. So here's a little bit more advanced character building concepts to help. And I misspelled character. But character. Anyway, So instead of it being the traditional 3x3 grid where you pick lawful, neutral, evil, that thing, um, I recently started using a 5x5 for my players, and it's been working really, really, really well. So it's good, moral, neutral, impure, and evil, and then lawful, social, neutral, rebel, chaotic. So you go from 9 differences to 25. So it opens it up a lot to differences, having more of a spectrum, which I think a lot of people can relate to in this day and age, at least. Having more variety of things to do. But then the idea of throwing kind of so that's 5x5, but then throwing a third axis onto it. So we kind of use a cube as the reference for it. So we had the values in the order, but then throw in a third one of reasoning and have logical, rational, neutral, irrational, and emotional. So another aspect of how your worldview of your character would be established, and you could know this right off the bat. So I think with a much more complicated alignment development portion of your character creation, it's going to give you a lot more things to instantly be able to build off your character. Does that make sense? So, I mean, what's how many factors is that? Is it 25 times 5, or is it, because it's 5 cubed, right? So
Yeah.
what is that, 125 permutations instead of 9?
Yeah.
So it gives a lot more customization. I don't know if this is too much, but we liked the theme of 5 on everything and throwing in a third thing, so you could be a moral value, a rebel order, and a rational thinker. So it's not going to complicate it, I don't think, too much, because these are things that you think about anyway. But if we incorporate into the character creation process, it'll help people kind of be grounded in who their character is off the bat.
All these 5s are going to have to implement a D5 system.
We'll have to invent a new dice. Awesome. Is there any other things you guys wanted to touch on for episode 1 of world building? It's been mostly lore dump. This has either been really fun and interesting for you guys, or you were falling asleep and left. So it's one or the other. You guys are either going to be super into this, or it's not what you are into. But we are looking for people to join the team. We're wanting to expand. Instead of 3 people, we're wanting to have more developers. So if you guys are watching this, that was referred to you because you are applying for this, we thank you for watching it. We got majority of the lore dump in there. We're wanting to go into the classes. So what we'll probably do next week is start with classes and go through the reference material. So we've been looking at the Starfinder system, the branch from the Pathfinder side, as influences, but we're definitely going to be making our own and changing it from there. But it's an already sci-fi fantasy system that's already been play tested, and we don't have to start from scratch and everything. We can use a lot of reference thing, but we've already kicked around some ideas of how to customize them and change them enough to where it's similar but different. Plus, we're going to be implementing the 5 elemental affinity subclass changes into it as well. So no matter how similar it is, this is definitely going to make it its own thing as well. So we would love to hear you guys' feedback. Our Discord link is down below. The world building thing, you guys can give us feedback of everything you thought. This is going to be uploaded on the YouTube as it is every week. But is there anything else you guys wanted to go over before we ended this session? It was pretty good. It went well. Except for the technical issues of the stream kept dropping.
Well, it wouldn't be a new thing.
Right.
I think we hit all the biggest points. We gave a lot of what we've done. showed how much there is to do. And right there at the end, we did a little bit of developing on the fly just to give people a hint. So keep checking us out. You'll get to see more of the fun developing stuff and a lot less overwhelming information. But honestly, this was great for me just to remember all the stuff we've done. So
Sure.
this is a big thing already. It's going to get bigger. So keep with us. Give us your ideas if you've got them. And maybe come join us here.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, that little bit of development is obviously the really fun part. So that's what it should be like from here on out. And if anybody's new and they need to get caught up on everything, instead of us spending the time to do that 3.5 hours of lore dump, just watch the video. So that's probably why half of you guys are here. We're glad you guys saw it. Obviously, like I said at the very beginning, keep in mind this is all tentative to change, and probably a lot of it will. So, if we've been doing this for a while, what you just saw may not all be what it is now, or then, now, because you're watching it later. You guys get what I'm saying? Might be different.
Yeah, whatever it was then, now, then. You're going to hopefully come in and shake us up, because at a certain point we start agreeing with each other because we've learned how we think.
Yeah.
So come tell us why we're wrong, and we'll make things better.
Awesome. Yes, we love throw in monkey wrenches, find problems and reasons why things won't work. We want to make sure this is as many perspectives as possible. But Joe, Ben, thank you very much for all the work you've been putting in so far. We have a long road ahead, but obviously I'm biased because I'm part of the project, but honestly I think we've come up with some really solid foundational things. That's going to make a really good game system, and I'm really excited to see it through to the end when we get these published and passed out, but also bringing the this game to the channel is going to be a lot of fun as well. Thanks to everybody for sticking with us, and we will catch you next week. Real quick, all the shows on the channel. We got Ages Past on Sunday, 6:30 p.m. Pacific. We have Horseman of the Apocalypse on Tuesday, same time. Wednesday is very soon. We're going to have Rise of Unity. And then we got this world building that is on Saturday mornings. So leave your Saturday morning cartoons and come join us. It's a lot of fun that we have. And then we have some other content that will be coming to the channel very soon. But that's it. And we'll catch you guys next time. Bye.